The dawn sky bled crimson across the Kansas plains as Samuel McGraw tracked the hoofprints. 3 days of trailing rustlers had left his face weathered deeper than his 58 years, the lines around his eyes carved by sun and memory alike. His cavalry training never quite left him, even a decade after hanging up the Union Blue. Samuel dismounted, crouching to study the tracks. Something wasn't right. These weren't the marks of cattle thieves hurrying stolen stock toward the Colorado border. These were the deliberate tracks of a wagon, followed by a single horse moving slow and stopping often, and they led straight to the abandoned way station that hadn't seen a proper stagecoach in 5 years. He approached cautiously, Winchester ready, but not raised. The old soldier in him never truly slept, even if he'd sworn off wearing a sidearm since Appomattox. The wagon sat like a shipwreck in the tall grass, one wheel shattered, canvas torn away. No horse, no driver, just a stillness that raised the hairs on Samuel's neck. "Hello?" Samuel called, voice rough from trail dust. "Anyone hurt?" That's when he heard it. A sound so faint, it might have been prairie wind through the grass. A whimper, human and wounded. Samuel moved quickly, then years falling away as training took over. He found her huddled against the broken wagon bed, half hidden beneath a tattered blanket that did little to cover her or protect against the night's chill. Her dress was torn, exposing skin marked with bruises in various stages of healing. Dried blood crusted at the corner of her mouth and along a cut above her eye. "Ma'am," he said softly, kneeling but keeping distance. "I'm Samuel McGraw. My ranch is about 5 miles east. Can you tell me what happened?" Her eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening with fear. She tried to retreat further into the wagon's shadow, wincing with the movement. "I won't harm you," Samuel said, removing his hat, letting her see his face in the strengthening dawn light. "I give you my word." The woman studied him, calculation mixing with desperation. When she finally spoke, the words emerged as fragile as frost. "I'm already dead inside." 5 words that carried more weight than any battlefield cry Samuel had ever heard. He'd seen that emptiness before in the eyes of men who survived Shiloh, but left their souls on that blood-soaked ground. "You're not dead yet, ma'am," he said gently. "Not while you're still breathing." He moved slowly, telegraphing each motion, and draped his coat over her shoulders. She flinched at the contact, but didn't resist. When he offered his canteen, she drank with the desperate thirst of someone denied water as punishment. "Can you tell me your name?" Samuel asked. "Evelyn," she whispered, clutching the coat tighter. "Evelyn Carter." The name struck like a physical blow. Carter. As in Thomas Carter, the new blacksmith who'd set up shop in town last year, the man who shoed Samuel's horses, who'd been appointed to the town council despite being a newcomer, who wore expensive shirts while claiming business was slow. Samuel tried to keep his expression neutral, but something must have shown on his face, because fear flickered across Evelyn's features. "You know him," she said, not a question. "I know of him," Samuel replied carefully. "He shoes my horses." As he helped her to stand, Samuel noticed the distinctive horseshoe print in the mud beside the wagon. A 5-pointed star was stamped into the center of each shoe, Thomas Carter's signature mark. The tracks told a story clearer than words. A wagon deliberately damaged a woman left to die of exposure and a husband who rode away alone. The code that had guided Samuel since the war was simple. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Stand between innocence and harm. Keep your word. It had never led him wrong, even when the law took different paths. "Mrs. Carter," he said, the decision already made, "I'm going to take you somewhere safe." Her expression showed she'd heard such promises before. "There is no safe," she murmured. "There is now," Samuel said, and helped her onto his horse. By mid-morning, they reached the modest two-story ranch house Samuel had built with his own hands after the war. Nothing fancy weathered wood with a wide front porch facing east toward the sunrise. A barn that needed painting and cattle pens beyond. But it was solid, and it was his. "Jacob," Samuel called as they approached. An older black man emerged from the barn, his left sleeve pinned empty below the elbow. Jacob Washington had fought with the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers, lost his arm at Honey Springs, and had been with Samuel since '67. He assessed the situation with a single glance and hurried to help. "Spare room ready?" Samuel asked, as Jacob helped Evelyn down. "Yes, Captain," Jacob replied, still using the military title despite the years. His eyes took in Evelyn's condition, his expression hardening. "This, the blacksmith's work." Samuel nodded grimly. "Heat water, bring the medicine kit." Inside the ranch house was simple but clean. Samuel helped Evelyn to the spare bedroom, then stepped outside while Jacob's wife Martha helped her change into a clean nightgown. War had taught Samuel basic medicine, but some wounds required a gentler touch than his calloused hands could provide. When he returned, Martha was applying salve to the worst bruises. The elderly woman's face was a mask of controlled fury. "3 ribs bruised," Martha reported. "None broke, praise God. Cuts need cleaning but no stitches. It's the shoulder that worries me, been dislocated and poorly set." Evelyn sat silently through the examination, staring at nothing. "I'll ride for Doc Harrison," Samuel said. "No." Evelyn's first show of emotion was panic. "No doctor. He'll tell. Everyone will know." "Mrs. Carter," Samuel said gently, "folks should know." "You don't understand." Her hands twisted the edge of the blanket. "Thomas has friends. Important friends." Samuel exchanged glances with Martha, who nodded slightly. The older woman placed a cup of willow bark tea in Evelyn's hands. "Drink this for pain, child. Then rest. No one's coming for you today." When Evelyn finally slept, Samuel retreated to the porch. The sun had climbed high, washing the prairie in golden light that belied the darkness he'd encountered. He rolled a cigarette with hands that didn't quite want to stay steady. "What you aiming to do, Captain?" Jacob asked, joining him. Samuel drew deeply on the cigarette. "The right thing." "Right thing cost plenty sometimes," Jacob observed. "Always has." Samuel's gaze drifted to the twin graves beneath the cottonwood tree, marked with simple stones. Sarah McGraw, beloved wife, 1839 to 1869, William McGraw, son and soldier, 1851 to 1863. 2 graves that defined the shape of his life. Sarah lost to the cancer that no doctor could cure. And William, barely 15, who'd run away to join the Union Army, despite Samuel's objections, only to die at Gettysburg before Samuel could find him. Samuel had failed to protect them. He wouldn't fail again. "Jacob, I need to ride to town. Keep watch." "You expecting trouble so soon?" Samuel crushed out his cigarette. "Thomas Carter won't wait long once he realizes she survived. And a man who'd leave his wife to die isn't a man who gives up easy." Centennial City had been optimistically named in advance of America's 100th birthday. In reality, it was a dusty Kansas cattle town of 800 souls spread along a single main street with pretensions toward respectability, now that the railroad spur connected it to Wichita. Samuel rode directly to the small building that served as both law office and jail. Sheriff Daniel Jackson sat behind a desk stacked with wanted posters, his boots propped up, hat tipped low. At 40, Jackson was relatively young for his position, but the town council liked that he was energetic and, more importantly, amenable to suggestion. "Samuel," the sheriff acknowledged without moving, "you're back sooner than expected. Find those rustlers." "Found something else," Samuel said. "Thomas Carter's wife." That got Jackson's attention. His boots hit the floor with a thump. "Evelyn, she's been missing 3 days. Thomas has half the county looking for her." "I expect he does." "What's that supposed to mean?" Jackson frowned. "It means I found her half dead in an abandoned wagon, beaten near to death, and left to die of exposure." Jackson's face darkened. "That's a serious accusation, Samuel." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." "Where is she now?" "Safe." Jackson stood resting his hands on his gun belt. "Samuel, I need to bring her in. Thomas has been worried sick, came to me soon as she went missing. Said she's been unwell in the head." "She's not unwell. She's been beaten," Samuel said flatly. "And I'm not bringing her anywhere near that man again." "That's not your choice to make." Jackson lowered his voice. "Look, I understand your concern. If what you're saying is true, it's terrible. But she's a married woman. Legally, she's Thomas's responsibility." "Responsibility," Samuel repeated. "Is that what you call leaving your wife to die in a broken wagon?" Jackson sighed. "You have proof it was Thomas. His horseshoe prints led straight away from the scene. Custom shoes with his 5-point star stamp. That's circumstantial at best. Could have been looking for her." Samuel leaned forward. "Sheriff, I've known you since you were wet behind the ears. You know me. I don't make accusations lightly." "I know," Jackson conceded. "But Thomas Carter is a town councilman now, has powerful friends, and a man has rights where his wife is concerned." "And what about her rights?" Samuel countered. "The law is complicated on that score." Jackson rubbed his jaw. "Samuel, as your friend, I'm warning you, bring her in. Let us sort this properly. Don't make this a personal crusade." Samuel straightened. "I appreciate the warning, Sheriff, but I've already made my choice." As he turned to leave, Jackson called after him. "Samuel Thomas reported her as potentially dangerous to herself. Said she's been having delusions threatening harm. If you're harboring her—" "Good day, Sheriff," Samuel said and stepped out into the harsh sunlight. He was halfway to his horse when a voice called his name. Dr. James Harrison hurried across the street, medical bag in hand. In his 60s, Harrison was the oldest physician in 3 counties and had been treating Samuel since his return from the war. "A word, Samuel," Harrison said quietly. "In private." They stepped into the narrow alley between the law office and the dry goods store. "You found Evelyn Carter," Harrison said without preamble. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "How did you know?" "Because Thomas Carter asked me to sign a commitment paper yesterday. Wanted me to declare her mentally unsound, suffering from female hysteria, and unfit to make her own decisions." "Did you sign it?" Harrison looked offended. "I most certainly did not. I've never even examined the woman. But Samuel," he lowered his voice further, "you need to be careful. Thomas has been meeting with Judge Williams and that railroad man Blackwood." "Jeremiah Blackwood, the land speculator." Harrison nodded. "The very same. They're plotting something, and with the railroad coming through, it involves money. Lots of it." Samuel processed this. "Thank you, Doctor. Could you come out to the ranch later? She needs medical attention, but was too frightened to let me fetch you." "Of course." Harrison glanced around. "But Samuel, watch yourself. This is bigger than a domestic dispute." As Samuel mounted his horse, he noticed Thomas Carter across the street stepping out of the bank. Their eyes met, and and something cold and calculated passed across the blacksmith's face before he smiled and tipped his hat in mocking courtesy. Samuel turned his horse and rode hard for home, a sense of urgency building. The confrontation was coming sooner than he'd expected. Evelyn was awake when Samuel returned, sitting in a rocking chair by the window. Martha had helped her into one of Sarah's old dresses, faded but clean. The bruises on her face stood out starkly against her pale skin, but her eyes had lost some of the emptiness from that morning. "You went to town," she said. "Not an accusation, but a statement." "I did." Samuel removed his hat. "Dr. Harrison will be coming by later." Fear flickered across her face. "I told you. He refused to sign commitment papers Thomas tried to get. He's a good man." Evelyn relaxed slightly. "Then you know what Thomas is trying to do." "I'm beginning to understand." Samuel pulled up a chair. "Mrs. Carter, I need to know your story. All of it." She looked out the window for a long moment, then reached into the pocket of the borrowed dress and removed a small leather pouch. She opened it, revealing a modest collection of coins and folded bills. "I was saving," she said quietly, "for a ticket to Denver. My father was county treasurer in Springfield, Illinois. He believed girls should understand finance same as boys. I kept Thomas's books, skimmed a little each month. He never noticed." "Why Denver?" "They have divorce laws there, more favorable to women." Her fingers closed around the pouch. "I almost had enough." "What happened?" Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "Thomas caught me helping Mr. Wilkins at the bank. I have neat handwriting, and Mr. Wilkins offered to pay me to copy ledgers after hours." She touched a particularly dark bruise on her cheek. "Thomas doesn't believe wives should work. Says it reflects poorly on the husband." Samuel felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice even. "How long has this been happening?" "The beating started 6 months after we married. At first he was so charming. Said he wanted to build a life out west. I believed him." She looked down at her hands. 2 years of hell. No children. Pain crossed her face. "There was one. I lost him." "After Thomas?" She couldn't finish. Samuel stood abruptly and walked to the window, needing a moment to control the anger building inside him. When he trusted himself to speak again, he asked, "Why didn't you seek help before?" "I tried, once." Evelyn's voice was hollow. "The minister said I should pray more, be a better wife. The sheriff suggested I not provoke Thomas's temper." Her eyes met Samuel's. "Then Thomas was appointed to the town council. Started meeting with powerful men. After that, no one would even listen." A commotion outside drew their attention. Jacob called Samuel's name, urgency in his voice. "Stay here," Samuel instructed, and hurried to the porch. Approaching the ranch was a group of riders. Sheriff Jackson in the lead, flanked by 2 deputies. And beside them, sitting tall in the saddle, was Thomas Carter. Even at a distance, Thomas cut an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard, and clothes too fine for a small-town blacksmith. At 40, he had the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Samuel stepped off the porch as the riders entered the yard. Jacob stood to one side, shotgun, not quite pointed at the visitors, but certainly ready. "Samuel." Sheriff Jackson nodded. "I'm here on official business." "I see you brought company," Samuel replied, eyes fixed on Thomas. Thomas Carter dismounted, his movements controlled and deliberate. "I've come for my wife McGraw." "She's not going anywhere with you, Carter." Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not your decision. Sheriff, please inform Mr. McGraw of the law regarding married women." Jackson looked uncomfortable but proceeded. Samuel, I have a valid marriage certificate and a warrant to search these premises for Evelyn Carter, reported missing by her husband. Missing? Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. You mean abandoned to die? Thomas stepped forward, voice pitched to Carrie. My poor wife has been suffering delusions. Wandered off during a spell. I've been searching day and night. That why you left her with nothing but a torn dress in a broken wagon? Samuel challenged. A flash of something surprise anger crossed Thomas's face before his mask of concern returned. I don't know what lies Evelyn has told you, but her condition makes her prone to inventions. Samuel turned to Jackson. Sheriff, you going to stand there and ignore those bruises? The evidence I told you about? Jackson shifted uncomfortably. Thomas says she fell from a horse during her episode. And you believe that it's not my place to... It's exactly your place, Samuel cut him off. To protect the citizens of this county. Thomas's false concern slipped, revealing irritation. Enough of this. Sheriff, execute your warrant. The deputies moved toward the house, but Samuel stepped directly into their path, hand raising to halt them. This is my property. You're not welcome here. Samuel, Jackson warned, don't make this worse. A tense silence stretched. Then the sound of approaching hooves broke it. Dr. Harrison rode into the yard, dismounting quickly. What's all this, then? Harrison demanded, surveying the scene. Doctor, Thomas greeted smoothly, I'm here to retrieve my wife. Perhaps you can help persuade Mr. McGraw to return her to proper care. Harrison's eyebrows rose. Proper care? Is that what you call it? He turned to the sheriff. Jackson, I need to examine Mrs. Carter before you consider moving her anywhere. You have no authority here, Doctor, Thomas said, edge creeping into his voice. Actually, I do, Harrison countered. As county physician, I can declare anyone medically unfit for transport, and I intend to examine the patient. Samuel saw Thomas's jaw clench, calculations running behind his eyes. Fine, Thomas finally said, but I insist on coming along to comfort my wife. Not a chance, Samuel stated flatly. Thomas took a step toward Samuel, hand drifting toward his belt. You've overstepped, rancher. This isn't your concern. I made it my concern when I found her half dead. The two men stood facing each other, tension crackling between them. Sheriff Jackson moved his horse between them. That's enough. Dr. Harrison will examine Mrs. Carter. Thomas, you'll wait out here with us. Samuel, you too. Deputies will accompany the doctor as neutral parties. No one was entirely satisfied with the arrangement, but no one openly objected. Harrison entered the house with the deputies, leaving Samuel Thomas Jacob and the sheriff in the yard. Thomas moved closer to Samuel, voice pitched low so only he could hear. You fought for the wrong side, Captain McGraw. Some lessons from that war weren't properly learned. Samuel didn't rise to the bait. I'd be careful making threats, Carter. Not a threat, just history. Thomas smiled thinly. You're on the wrong side again. Before Samuel could respond, Dr. Harrison emerged from the house, face grim. Sheriff, Harrison announced formally, I am declaring Evelyn Carter unfit for transport due to 3 bruised ribs, shoulder dislocation, multiple contusions, and possible internal injuries requiring observation. He fixed Thomas with a cold stare, none of which are consistent with falling from a horse. Thomas's facade cracked further. This is outrageous. She is my wife. And my patient, Harrison countered. She stays here under medical supervision for at least 3 days. Sheriff Jackson looked relieved at the temporary solution. You heard the doctor. Thomas, We'll need to respect medical authority here." "This isn't over," Thomas said, eyes locked on Samuel. "Not by a long measure." As the group prepared to depart, Evelyn appeared in the doorway of the ranch house, standing straight despite obvious pain. Her eyes found Thomas, and for the first time, Samuel saw something beyond fear in her expression, the first spark of defiance. Thomas saw it too. His face darkened as he mounted his horse. "3 days, Evelyn," he called. "Then you're coming home to fulfill your duties as my wife." "I'd rather die in the wilderness," she replied, voice carrying clear across the yard. Thomas's knuckles whitened on his reins. With a final glare at Samuel, he turned his horse and rode away, the sheriff and deputies following. Dr. Harrison approached Samuel after the others were out of earshot. "You've made a powerful enemy today." "Seems I have," Samuel agreed. "It's not just Thomas. He's connected to Blackwood and the railroad interests. They want land along the proposed route." "My land," Samuel realized. Harrison nodded. "Your ranch sits on a crucial water access point for the new spur line. I've heard rumors they've been trying to force out smaller ranchers all along the proposed route." Samuel looked to where Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the riders disappear into the distance. "This is bigger than I thought." "Indeed. And you've just positioned yourself as an obstacle to men who don't tolerate obstacles." Harrison gripped Samuel's shoulder. "Be careful, my friend. The next move will come soon, and it won't be as direct as today's confrontation." As if to punctuate the doctor's warning, the distant figures of Thomas and his companions crested a hill. Thomas paused, turning back to stare at the ranch, before disappearing from view. Samuel felt the weight of the coming storm settle on his shoulders. The simple act of human decency helping an injured woman had placed him squarely against forces far larger than one angry husband. But the choice remained clear. Some lines a man didn't cross. Some principles he didn't compromise, no matter the cost. "Jacob," Samuel called, "double the watch tonight, and check the cattle water at first light." The struggle for Evelyn's freedom had begun. But Samuel was beginning to understand that it was also a fight for the soul of Centennial City itself, and perhaps for his own redemption for those he'd failed to protect before. On the horizon, storm clouds gathered. Samuel woke before dawn, the old habits of war never quite leaving him. The ranch house stood quiet, but he sensed something wrong before his feet hit the floorboards. He dressed quickly, buckling on the gun belt he hadn't worn in years, the weight both foreign and familiar against his hip. Outside, the eastern sky showed the first pale streaks of morning. Jacob waited on the porch, Winchester cradled in his arm, expression grim. "South pasture," Jacob said without preamble. "You need to see." They rode in silence, frost crunching beneath hooves. As they crested the low rise overlooking the water hole, Samuel reined his horse to a stop, jaw tightening at the sight below. 3 of his cattle lay dead at the water's edge, bloated and stiff. The water itself had a strange oily sheen in the early light. "Poison," Jacob confirmed. "Found it at first light. Strychnine, I reckon." Samuel dismounted, examining the scene with a soldier's eye. Boot prints circled the pond, 3 men moving with purpose sometime in the night. "Drive the rest of the herd to the north pasture," Samuel instructed. "We'll have to dam this off, dig a new water source." "This'll ruin us if it continues," Jacob said quietly. "We're already running tight with the drought." Samuel nodded, calculating losses against dwindling reserves. 3 cattle meant nearly $200 gone, a substantial blow to their already strained finances. "If more died, Thomas Carter?" Jacob asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Perhaps," Samuel said. "Or Blackwood, or both." "Mighty quick response to yesterday." Samuel's eyes traced the horizon toward town. This was planned before yesterday. We just accelerated their timeline. They returned to find Dr. Harrison's buggy already in the yard. Inside, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table while the doctor rebandaged her ribs. She looked different this morning, still bruised but somehow more substantial, as if finding her voice yesterday had restored something essential. Her eyes met Samuel's as he entered. "Your cattle," news traveled fast, even on isolated ranches. Samuel nodded. 3 dead, poisoned water hole. "Thomas," she said with certainty, "we don't know that for certain." "I do." Evelyn winced as Harrison tightened a bandage. "It's how he operates. Indirect. Destroys what people value until they have nothing left." Harrison finished his ministrations and packed his bag. "The physical injuries will heal faster than the others, I'm afraid." He turned to Samuel. "You should know Thomas has filed a formal complaint with Judge Williams. Claims you've abducted his wife and violated his marital rights." "What does that mean legally?" Samuel asked. "It means you have 3 days until the judge issues a ruling," Harrison replied. "And given Williams's connections to Blackwood, the ruling won't be in our favor," Samuel finished. Harrison nodded grimly. "You need allies, Samuel. Powerful ones." After the doctor left, Samuel sat across from Evelyn at the kitchen table. Martha placed coffee before them, then tactfully withdrew. "Mrs. Carter." "Evelyn, please," she interrupted. "After all, this formality seems unnecessary." "Evelyn," Samuel amended, "we have limited time and options. I need to understand exactly what we're facing." She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, drawing strength from its warmth. "Thomas came west with money that wasn't his. Embezzled from his former employer in Chicago. He used it to establish himself here to appear prosperous." She met Samuel's eyes directly. "He's not just a blacksmith. That's his cover. He's Blackwood's agent, helping identify vulnerable properties." "For the railroad expansion," Samuel concluded. "Yes, your ranch sits on a crucial water source, as I'm sure you know. The new spur line needs water for the steam engines. Thomas has been acquiring properties along the proposed route through various means, including making certain ranchers fail." Evelyn nodded. "Poisoned cattle, mysterious fires, sudden bank foreclosures, whatever works." Samuel absorbed this, pieces falling into place. "And your part in this?" "I kept his books, saw the patterns. When I questioned him," she gestured to her bruises, "he's been planning your demise for months, Mr. McGraw. I'm just the convenient excuse to accelerate the timeline." "Samuel," he corrected. "And what of the law? Sheriff Jackson, Judge Williams." Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "Bought and paid for. The sheriff might have some conscience left, but the judge is firmly in Blackwood's pocket. Centennial City is being remade, and men like you, independent, principled, have no place in their vision." Samuel stood moving to the window to study his land in the strengthening daylight. The ranch wasn't much compared to the cattle operations further west, but it was his. Built with his own hands after the war when he'd needed something to hold on to. "There's a legal hearing in 3 days," he said finally. "I won't surrender you to Thomas, but I need to find a way to fight this legally." "There's no legal path that ends well," Evelyn said quietly. "Not with Judge Williams presiding." "Then we need to change the equation." Samuel turned back to her. "I'm riding to Colorado Territory. Today." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Colorado? That's 2 days' hard ride. I have a friend there, Colonel James Henderson, my former commanding officer. He has connections, political influence." "And you think he'll help?" "He owes me his life," Samuel said simply, "and Teton Creek 62. Something shifted in Evelyn's expression, the first glimmer of genuine hope. "You're risking everything for a woman you barely know." "I'm standing for what's right," Samuel corrected. "Same as I've always done. Even when it cost you everything." Her eyes drifted to the photographs on the mantel, Sarah and William forever frozen in time. Samuel's jaw tightened, especially then. The journey to Colorado Territory demanded every ounce of Samuel's endurance. He rode his best horse, stopping only when absolutely necessary, following the old Santa Fe Trail westward. The second day brought him into the foothills of the Rockies, where the air grew thinner and trails steeper. Colonel Henderson's silver mine operation sprawled across the mountainside like a small kingdom. Guards stopped Samuel at the perimeter, suspicious, until he mentioned the colonel's name and his own. "Wait here," one instructed, and rode ahead. 20 minutes later, a tall figure on horseback approached. Colonel James Henderson had aged well in the decade since Samuel had seen him last. Silver had replaced the gold in his beard, but his back remained ramrod straight, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "Captain McGraw," Henderson called, a genuine smile breaking across his weathered face. "By God, it is you." They dismounted, clasping hands that turned into a brief, firm embrace. "You look like hell, Samuel," Henderson observed. "Come inside." The colonel's home was a study in contrasts, the exterior rough-hewn logs, the interior appointed with luxuries hauled at great expense from Denver and beyond. Crystal decanters, oriental carpets, leather-bound books. The spoils of Colorado silver. Henderson poured 2 whiskeys, pushing one across his massive oak desk. "So," he said, settling into his chair, "what brings you to my mountain after all these years? Must be urgent to risk that trail alone." Samuel took a long swallow of whiskey before answering. "I need help, James. The kind only you can provide." He laid out the situation: Evelyn's abuse, Thomas Carter's connections to Blackwood, and the railroad interests, the corrupt local officials, and the poisoned cattle. Henderson listened without interruption, only the occasional tightening of his jaw betraying his reaction. 3 days until the hearing," Samuel finished. "After that, they'll legally take her back to Carter and likely seize my ranch soon after." Henderson studied the amber liquid in his glass. "Thomas Carter," he mused. "That name's familiar." He crossed to a filing cabinet, rifling through documents with practiced efficiency. "Here." He extracted a yellowed paper. "Confederate deserter. Not just any deserter. He abandoned his unit at Vicksburg, but not before selling their positions to Union scouts." "He fought for the South?" Samuel asked, surprised. "Fought is generous. Thomas Carter was a quartermaster who saw opportunity in chaos, betrayed both sides when it suited him." Henderson tossed the document on the desk. "He disappeared after the surrender. Rumors placed him in Chicago, then Kansas City. And now Centennial City," Samuel concluded, "working for Blackwood and the railroad interests." Henderson refilled their glasses. "The railroad men are carving up the West, Samuel. They don't care about little towns or small ranchers. They see the future, and they're building it with or without permission." "So you won't help," Samuel said, disappointment evident. "I didn't say that." Henderson leaned forward. "This Blackwood character, he's overreaching. The railroad commissioners in Denver would be very interested to learn about his methods. Poisoning water holes using corrupt local officials, it reflects poorly on their enterprises." Hope stirred in Samuel's chest. "You have influence with the commissioners." "I do indeed. My silver moves on their trains." Henderson smiled thinly. "But, more importantly, I own significant shares in their company, enough to make them listen. What can you do in 3 days? Telegraph the territorial governor. He owes me favors. Request a stay on all legal proceedings in Centennial City, pending investigation into judicial impropriety. Henderson's eyes gleamed. Might buy you 2 weeks instead of 3 days. And after that we expose Blackwood's operation properly, with evidence. Henderson studied Samuel's face. But it won't be simple, old friend. These men play for keeps. Carter already tried to kill this woman once. He'll try again. I know. Henderson opened a drawer and removed a Colt revolver, sliding it across the desk. Take this. Samuel stared at the weapon but didn't touch it. I haven't carried a sidearm since the war. This isn't war, Samuel. It's survival. Henderson's voice softened. I remember when you made that vow. After Fredericksburg, wasn't it? You said you'd never take another life. I've kept that promise, and it does you credit. But sometimes keeping one promise means breaking another. Henderson pushed the gun closer. You promised to protect this woman, didn't you? The question hung between them, weighted with memories of other promises, other failures. Samuel finally reached for the revolver, feeling its familiar weight. I'll telegraph Denver immediately, Henderson said. And I'll follow in 3 days with documentation about Carter's wartime activities. That should create enough questions to slow the legal process. Samuel holstered the weapon. Thank you, James. Don't thank me yet. Henderson's expression turned grave. When men like Blackwood and Carter are cornered, they become desperate. And desperate men are the most dangerous kind. Samuel rode hard, pushing his horse to its limits, but the return journey still consumed precious time. As he approached the outskirts of his property on the evening of the 3rd day, exhaustion clouded his vision, making the scene before him seem unreal at first. Smoke rose from the north pasture, black against the twilight sky. He spurred his tired mount toward the ranch house, dread building with each hoofbeat. The main structure still stood, but the barn was ablaze, flames reaching skyward in hungry tongues. Jacob and 2 neighboring ranchers worked desperately with buckets, trying to control the fire. Evelyn, Samuel shouted as he dismounted. Jacob pointed toward the house. Inside. She's safe. Martha's with her. Samuel found them in the kitchen, Martha applying a damp cloth to a cut on Evelyn's forehead. When Evelyn saw him, relief flooded her face. You're back, she breathed. We weren't sure. What happened? Samuel demanded, kneeling beside her. 3 men, Martha answered. Came just after sundown. Said they had a message from Thomas. I recognized one, Evelyn added. Thomas's cousin from Abilene. They tried to take me, but Jacob, she faltered. Jacob fired a warning shot, Martha continued. They set fire to the barn in retaliation, said they'd be back with the sheriff tomorrow. Samuel's jaw tightened. Are you hurt beyond this cut? No, Evelyn insisted. I'm fine. But Samuel, Tomorrow's hearing has been postponed, he interrupted. Colonel Henderson telegraphed the territorial governor. There's an investigation coming into Judge Williams's conduct. Hope flickered in Evelyn's eyes. How long? 2 weeks. Maybe more. Time to build our case properly. She slumped slightly in relief, then straightened. Thomas won't accept that. He'll come himself next time. I'm counting on it, Samuel said grimly. Outside, the fire was finally under control, though the barn was a total loss. Samuel surveyed the damage, calculating yet another financial blow. Between the poisoned cattle and now the barn, his resources were stretched dangerously thin. Samuel McGraw, He turned to find a young man on horseback, clearly a messenger from town. "That's me." "Telegram from Denver, sir." The boy handed over a yellow envelope. "And Mr. Wilkins at the bank asked me to deliver this as well." He passed a formal-looking letter bearing the bank's seal. Samuel tipped the messenger and opened the telegram, first relief washing over him as he read Henderson's confirmation that the stay of proceedings had been granted. The bank letter, however, brought that relief crashing down. "What is it?" Jacob asked, noting Samuel's expression. "Foreclosure notice," Samuel said quietly. "Bank's calling in my loan. Full amount due in 30 days. Jacob swore softly. "That's impossible. We've never missed a payment." "It's not about payments. It's about the land." Amos folded the notice carefully. "Blackwood's moving pieces we can't see." Later that night, after ensuring Evelyn was resting comfortably and posting guards around the property, Samuel sat alone on the porch. The revolver Henderson had given him lay on the table beside a half-empty whiskey bottle. The weight of accumulated losses pressed down on him, the cattle, the barn, and now the threat of losing everything to the bank. The sound of approaching horses brought him to his feet, hand moving instinctively to the gun. He relaxed slightly when he recognized Dr. Harrison's buggy. "Heard about the fire," Harrison said as he climbed down. "Came to check on Mrs. Carter." "She's resting. Minor cut, nothing serious." Harrison studied Samuel's face in the lamplight. "And you, when did you last sleep?" "Can't recall," Samuel admitted. "The hearing's postponed," Harrison said. "News spread through town like wildfire. Thomas Carter was in a rage at the saloon, nearly took a man's head off for suggesting it was proper procedure. And Blackwood, calmer, more calculating, bought drinks for the whole establishment, talked about progress and opportunity." Harrison lowered his voice. "But later I overheard him with Thomas. Said something about alternative approaches if legal means were delayed." "Like poisoned cattle and burned barns," Samuel said bitterly. "Or worse." Harrison glanced toward the house. "You've made powerful enemies, Samuel. Men who aren't accustomed to obstacles. I've faced worse." "Have you?" Harrison challenged. "These aren't soldiers following orders. These are businessmen following profit. They have resources connections reaching to Chicago and beyond." "So what would you have me do? Doctor, return Evelyn to a man who nearly killed her?" "Of course not," Harrison said quickly. "But perhaps there's a third path. Denver, maybe, or further west. Somewhere beyond their reach." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Running. Abandoning the ranch, the life Samuel had built. It wasn't a new thought, it had occurred to him during the long ride back from Colorado. "This is my home," Samuel said finally. "I didn't surrender it to the Confederates, and I won't surrender it to railroad men." Harrison sighed. "I expected as much, which is why I brought this." He retrieved a package from his buggy. Medical supplies, extra bandages, laudanum, surgical instruments, just in case. The implications weren't lost on Samuel. "You think it will come to that?" "I think you should be prepared for all possibilities." Harrison clasped Samuel's shoulder. "The town isn't entirely against you, you know. There are those of us who remember what this place was before Blackwood arrived, who still believe in certain principles. Not enough to stand publicly. Perhaps not yet. But minds can change when confronted with undeniable truths." Harrison climbed back into his buggy. "Franklin Pierce at the newspaper has been asking questions, discreetly." "The editor," Samuel was surprised. "I thought he was firmly in Blackwood's camp." "Pierce follows stories, not men. And he senses a story here." Harrison gathered his reins. "I'll check on Mrs. Carter tomorrow. Try to get some rest, Samuel. The real battle is just beginning." After Harrison departed, Samuel remained on the porch, turning this new information over in his mind. The newspaper editor could be a valuable ally if he could be trusted. Franklin Pierce had come west after the war using his experience as a battlefield correspondent to establish the Centennial City Chronicle. The paper was small, but respected even by those who disagreed with its occasionally progressive editorials. A soft footfall behind him interrupted his thoughts. Evelyn stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. "You should be resting," Samuel said. "I heard voices. Heard—" She moved to sit in the chair beside him, eyeing the revolver on the table. "You're carrying again?" "Circumstances demanded it." She nodded, understanding. "The barn can be rebuilt." "Everything can be rebuilt," Samuel agreed. "But it takes time and money. Both are in short supply." "Because of me," Evelyn said quietly. "Because of men who believe everything has a price." Samuel's voice hardened. "This isn't your burden to carry." "Isn't it? If I hadn't been here, if you hadn't been here, they would have found another way." Samuel turned to face her directly. "Blackwood wants this land. Thomas is just his instrument. You're caught in the middle of something that was already in motion." Evelyn considered this. "Perhaps, but my presence has certainly complicated your situation." "Life is complicated," Samuel managed a small smile. "Simple is for gravestones." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by night sounds, crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional hoot of an owl. For a moment, it was almost peaceful, as if they were simply two people sharing a porch on a pleasant evening. "Tell me about your wife," Evelyn said suddenly. Samuel stiffened slightly. "Sarah." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't pry." Evelyn backtracked. "It's just I've been staying in your home wearing her clothes. I feel as if I should know something about her." Samuel's gaze drifted to the cottonwood tree and its two graves. "She was kind, stronger than she appeared, followed me from Pennsylvania to Kansas after the war, never complained once about the hardships." His voice softened with memory. "She could play the piano beautifully. Always said we'd have one here someday once we were properly established." "And your son, William, headstrong, believed in causes with his whole heart." Pride and pain mingled in Samuel's voice. "Ran away to join the Union Army at 15. I was already serving, tried to find him, bring him home. Too late." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said softly. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long that it doesn't still hurt." Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing beyond the bruises and circumstances. Evelyn Carter was observant, intelligent, and surprisingly resilient, despite everything she'd endured. "No," he admitted. "Not so long." The moment stretched between them, something unspoken passing in the night air. Then a horse whinnied from the corral, breaking the spell. "You should return to Colorado," Evelyn said suddenly. "Both of us should. Your friend, the colonel, could protect us there until matters are settled legally." "Running won't solve this," Samuel replied. "Blackwood would simply seize the ranch in our absence." "Is land worth your life?" Evelyn challenged. "It's not about the land," Samuel said. "It's about what's right. What's just? Justice is a luxury, Samuel. Survival is a necessity." Before he could respond, the sound of a galloping horse approaching drew their attention. Jacob materialized from the shadows, rifle ready, as the rider entered the yard. "It's Pierce," Samuel identified the newspaper editor. "From town." Franklin Pierce dismounted quickly, his usually immaculate appearance, disheveled face, urgent in the lantern light. "McGraw," he called, You need to hear this immediately." Samuel met him in the yard. "What's happened?" Pierce caught his breath. "Blackwood's called in private security from Kansas City. Professional men, dangerous men. They arrived on the evening train." "How many?" "5 that I saw, led by a man called Daniels, ex-Army rumored to have been a Pinkerton before he was dismissed for excessive force." Pierce lowered his voice. "They're not here for show, Samuel. They're here to finish what Thomas started." Samuel absorbed this calculating odds that were growing increasingly unfavorable. "There's more," Pierce continued. "Judge Williams held a private session tonight, despite the territorial stay order. Declared it didn't apply to emergency proceedings regarding a woman in danger." Samuel's blood ran cold. "What kind of proceedings?" "He granted Thomas emergency custody of Evelyn, citing concerns for her mental state. Authorized use of all necessary force to return her to her husband's care." Pierce's expression was grim. "They're coming at dawn, Samuel. Thomas Blackwood's men, the sheriff, all of them." From the porch, Evelyn had heard everything. Her face was pale in the lamplight, but her voice remained steady. "So it begins," she said. Dawn came with unusual silence. No birdsong, no distant lowing of cattle, just the hushed anticipation of approaching conflict. Samuel had spent the night making preparations, his military experience guiding decisions that civilian life rarely demanded. The ranch house had become a fortress of necessity, windows boarded, water, and provisions secured. Jacob positioned himself on the second floor with a clear view of the eastern approach. Martha tended to Evelyn, whose calm determination belied the terror Samuel occasionally glimpsed in her eyes. "They're coming!" Jacob called from his lookout position. 8 riders, Thomas Carter in front. Samuel checked the Colt Henderson had given him, then placed it on the table, still reluctant to embrace what it represented. "Remember," he instructed the small group gathered in the main room, "our position is defensive only. We're standing on legal ground with the territorial stay order." "Tell that to Blackwood's hired guns," Jacob muttered. Samuel turned to Evelyn, who stood straight, despite the lingering pain from her injuries. "You don't have to face him." "Yes, I do." Her voice was steady. "I've spent 2 years looking away. Not anymore." The approaching riders entered the yard in a loose formation that Samuel recognized as tactically sound, spread wide enough to create multiple targets close enough to support each other. Sheriff Jackson led the official contingent, flanked by 2 deputies. Thomas Carter rode beside the sheriff, back straight, expression coldly confident. Behind them came 5 hard-faced strangers, professionally equipped and positioned. These would be Blackwood's security force men, accustomed to violence as a business transaction. Notably absent was Jeremiah Blackwood himself. The puppet master remained safely distant from the strings he pulled. Samuel stepped onto the porch arms, deliberately away from his sides, empty hands visible. The territorial stay order was prominent in his shirt pocket, legal protection that suddenly seemed fragile as paper against the armed men before him. "Samuel McGraw," Sheriff Jackson called, reining his horse to a stop. "I have a court order for the immediate return of Evelyn Carter to her husband's custody. Step aside and allow us to execute this order peacefully." "I have a stay order from the territorial governor," Samuel responded, voice carrying across the yard. "All legal proceedings regarding this matter have been suspended pending investigation." "That stay doesn't apply to emergency custody declarations," Jackson replied, though Samuel noted the discomfort in his expression. "Judge Williams ruled last night. A ruling made in private without representation for Mrs. Carter in direct contravention of territorial authority." Samuel remained calm. Sheriff, you know this isn't right. What I know doesn't matter. Jackson nodded toward Thomas Carter. The law is clear on a husband's rights. Thomas urged his horse forward, eyes searching the house behind Samuel. Where is she, McGray, hiding my wife away like stolen property? I'm here. Evelyn stepped onto the porch beside Samuel, and a ripple of reaction passed through the mounted men. Her bruises had faded to yellowish green, but remained starkly visible against her pale skin. More telling was her posture, straight-backed chin, raised, no longer the cowering victim Thomas had expected. Thomas's expression flickered momentary uncertainty, replaced by hardening anger. You've caused quite enough trouble, Evelyn. It's time to come home. That place was never home, she replied clearly. And I'm never going back. Thomas turned to the sheriff. You see, she's been poisoned against me. This is exactly the derangement I warned about. His voice rose, performing for his audience. Evelyn, darling, you're unwell. You need care, not this isolation. The only care I needed was for the broken ribs and dislocated shoulder you gave me. Evelyn responded, each word precise as a surgeon's cut. A charged silence followed her statement. Samuel noticed the deputies exchange uncomfortable glances. Even Jackson shifted in his saddle. Sheriff, Samuel said into the silence, I propose a compromise. Mrs. Carter remains here until a proper hearing can be conducted with legal representation and medical testimony. Dr. Harrison has documented her injuries and can attest to their cause. Lies and slander, Thomas snapped. She fell from a horse during an episode of hysteria. Harrison is clearly in league with you, spreading falsehoods. Then you won't object to a proper hearing, Samuel countered, with witnesses and evidence presented openly. The logic trapped Thomas momentarily, but the man at the center of Blackwood's security team, Daniels, presumably nudged his horse forward. This conversation is wasteful, he stated flatly. His voice carried the cold precision of a man accustomed to command. We have legal authorization to retrieve Mrs. Carter. Either produce her willingly, or we will secure the premises and extract her. Samuel recognized the type dead eyes, methodical mind violence, as simply another tool. Such men had filled the ranks of both armies during the war, emerging afterward to sell their particular skills to whoever paid. That would be trespassing on private property, Samuel said evenly. And kidnapping. Daniels smiled without warmth. It would be enforcement of a legal order. His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. I'd advise against resistance, Captain McGraw. Your military record suggests you understand the concept of overwhelming force. The mention of his military rank confirmed Samuel's suspicions that these men had thoroughly investigated him. They knew his background, likely his weaknesses too. Last chance, McGraw, Thomas called. Send her out, or we come in. Samuel felt Evelyn tense beside him, her breathing quickening despite her outward composure. He stepped slightly forward, physically placing himself between her and the mounted men. She stays, he said simply. Thomas's face darkened. He turned to the sheriff. You heard him. Defying a court order. Arrest him. Jackson hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. Thomas, perhaps we should— Now, Sheriff, Thomas insisted. Or are you neglecting your duty? The accusation struck its mark. Jackson straightened professionalism, overcoming his personal doubts. He gestured to his deputies to dismount. Samuel McGraw, you're under arrest for interference with a lawful court order, Jackson announced formally. Step forward with your hands visible. This is wrong, Sheriff, and you know it, Samuel replied without moving. Maybe so, but it's still the law. Jackson's voice lowered. Don't make this worse, Samuel. Please. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Samuel calculated options, none favorable. Armed resistance meant bloodshed, likely deaths. Surrender meant that Evelyn returned to Thomas and certain danger. A sudden commotion from the road interrupted the tension. A carriage approached at speed, the driver urging the horses to a dangerous pace. Samuel recognized Dr. Harrison's buggy, but the doctor wasn't alone. Franklin Pierce, the newspaper editor, sat beside him clutching a leather portfolio. The newcomers pulled into the yard, Harrison reining the lathered horses expertly between the opposing parties. "Sheriff Jackson," Harrison called, not bothering to descend, "I have evidence you need to see immediately. Evidence that affects this proceeding." Thomas's expression soured. "This is irregular, Sheriff. We have a valid court order." "One obtained through fraud," Pierce interjected, opening his portfolio, "and I have the documentation to prove it." Jackson frowned. "What kind of documentation?" Pierce extracted several papers. "Financial records showing Thomas Carter deposited $3,000 into Judge Williams's personal account 2 days ago. Witness statements from Chicago detailing Carter's embezzlement charges before he fled west. And Confederate Army desertion papers with testimony that he sold information to both sides during the war." Thomas's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "Lies and fabrications. I won't stand for this slander." "It's not slander if it's true," Pierce replied calmly. "And I have supporting documentation for every claim. All verified by telegraph with authorities in Chicago and Washington." Samuel watched Thomas, carefully noting the calculating desperation replacing his earlier confidence. Desperate men were unpredictable, and Thomas was rapidly running out of options. Sheriff Jackson dismounted, approaching the buggy to examine the papers. His expression grew increasingly grave as he read. "These are serious allegations," Jackson said finally. "If accurate, they call into question the validity of Judge Williams's ruling." "They're more than allegations," Harrison added. "The territorial investigator is already interviewing Judge Williams this morning. The whole corrupt arrangement is unraveling, Sheriff." Thomas suddenly spurred his horse forward, pushing between the deputies to face Samuel directly. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "She is still my wife under the law, my property." "No man owns another," Samuel replied quietly. "High principles from a man about to lose everything," Thomas sneered. He raised his voice, addressing the yard. "McGraw's bank loan has been called in, 30 days until foreclosure. Fighting me means fighting Blackwood, means fighting the railroad. You've already lost, Captain, you just don't know it yet." Daniels moved his horse alongside Thomas. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we should withdraw and reconsider our approach." The suggestion clearly infuriated Thomas, but even he could see the tactical situation had shifted. With Pierce's evidence and the territorial investigation force would now have greater consequences. "This isn't over," Thomas said, eyes fixed on Evelyn. "Not by any measure." He turned his horse sharply. "Sheriff, I expect you to uphold the law once you've verified these so-called allegations." Jackson nodded stiffly. "I'll do my duty, Thomas, whatever that proves to be." The group departed in a considerably less organized formation than they had arrived, Thomas and Daniels conferring in low voices as they rode. Only Sheriff Jackson lingered, approaching the porch after the others had cleared the yard. "Samuel," he said quietly, "you've bought time, nothing more. If these allegations prove true, they'll discredit Williams and Carter, but the legal situation regarding Mrs. Carter remains complicated." He glanced at Evelyn. "No judge in Kansas will easily overturn marital rights, even with evidence of—" he hesitated, "mistreatment." Then we'll find a judge outside Kansas, Samuel replied. That means leaving your ranch undefended during foreclosure proceedings. Jackson's expression was genuinely concerned. Blackwood's playing a longer game than Carter. He wants your land with or without this dispute. After Jackson departed, Dr. Harrison and Franklin Pierce joined them on the porch. The atmosphere had lightened somewhat, but the temporary victory did little to resolve their fundamental predicament. That was well-timed, Samuel acknowledged. Luck more than planning, Pierce admitted. The territorial investigator arrived on the midnight train. Very discreet, very thorough. He went straight to Williams's home this morning with questions about certain financial transactions. "How did you get the records?" Evelyn asked. Pierce smiled thinly. "The bank clerk who moonlights as my typesetter has an excellent memory for numbers, particularly large deposits to judicial accounts." "And the Chicago information," Samuel pressed. "I've been a newspaper man for 20 years, Pierce replied. "I keep correspondence with editors nationwide. Thomas Carter's flight from embezzlement charges wasn't particularly well hidden." Harrison cleared his throat. "We've bought you time, but Thomas was right about one thing: this isn't over. Men like Carter and Blackwood don't surrender easily." "No," Samuel agreed. "They'll regroup and return with a different strategy." He turned to Pierce. "Will you publish what you've found?" The editor hesitated. "I'd like to, but Blackwood owns controlling interest in the paper's creditors. One word from him, and I lose everything." "So we all face the same choice," Samuel observed. "Principles or survival." "Sometimes survival is the only principle that matters," Evelyn said quietly. Harrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Thomas will be desperate now. Cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. You both should consider leaving, at least temporarily, and abandon the ranch to foreclosure." Samuel shook his head. "Everything I have is tied to this land." "Everything except your life," Harrison countered. "And hers." The truth of this hung heavy in the air. Samuel had committed himself to Evelyn's protection, but that commitment now threatened everything else he valued. "There may be another way," Pierce interjected. "Colonel Henderson's influence with the Railroad Commission could provide leverage against Blackwood. If the commissioners learned of his methods—" "They already suspect," Samuel replied. "Henderson is gathering evidence, but these processes take time. Time we don't have with the foreclosure looming." Evelyn had been listening silently, her expression thoughtful. Now she straightened decision evident in her posture. "I have a proposal," she said firmly, "one that addresses both immediate concerns." All eyes turned to her. "I'll return to Thomas." "Absolutely not," Samuel objected immediately. Evelyn raised her hand. "Hear me out. I return under specific conditions, public conditions, no isolated residence, daily visits from Dr. Harrison to verify my well-being, and most importantly, Thomas withdraws any claim against your ranch." "He'd never agree," Harrison said. "He will, if it's the only way to save his reputation and position," Evelyn countered. "Thomas values appearances above all else. If I return voluntarily, he maintains the facade of a proper marriage. His arrangement with Blackwood is secondary to his pride." "It's too dangerous," Samuel insisted. "You've seen what he's capable of." "I've survived it for 2 years," Evelyn replied, a new steel in her voice. "I can survive it a little longer, especially with conditions that prevent the worst abuses." Pierce nodded slowly. "It's not without merit. Carter's position in town depends on maintaining certain appearances. Public scrutiny would force restraint. And it solves nothing in the long term," Samuel argued. "It just returns you to captivity." "While preserving your ranch," Evelyn pointed out. and giving Colonel Henderson time to gather evidence against Blackwood. The selflessness of her proposal struck Samuel deeply. This woman, who had suffered so much already, was willing to return to her abuser to protect him and his property. The notion was simultaneously noble and utterly unacceptable. "No," he said flatly. "We'll find another way." "There may not be another way," she replied softly. "Not one that saves both of us." Before Samuel could respond, Jacob called from his lookout position. "Riders coming, not the same group." They moved to the edge of the porch for a better view. Two men approached at a steady pace, neither appearing threatening. As they drew closer, Samuel recognized Marshal William Carter Thomas's brother and the federal lawman from the territorial office. "More complications," Harrison muttered. The marshal and his deputy dismounted in the yard, approaching with the measured confidence of men accustomed to authority. Unlike Thomas William Carter, carried himself with genuine dignity, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Captain McGraw," he greeted Samuel with a respectful nod. "Marshal William Carter, I believe you've been expecting me." "Not specifically," Samuel replied cautiously. "Colonel Henderson sent a rather urgent telegram regarding my brother's activities." The marshal's gaze moved to Evelyn, noting her injuries with a slight tightening around his eyes. "Mrs. Carter, I presume?" Evelyn nodded, studying the family resemblance between the brothers. "Marshal, I've just come from town," William continued. "Had a most illuminating conversation with the territorial investigator and my brother." His expression revealed nothing of that encounter. "May we speak privately, Captain?" Samuel hesitated, then nodded. "My study." Inside, Marshal Carter declined the offered chair, instead moving to examine the military commission framed on Samuel's wall. "5th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry," he read. "Antietam, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg. Distinguished service." He turned back to Samuel. "I was with the 10th Virginia, other side of the field at Gettysburg." The revelation hung between them, former enemies now connected by circumstances neither could have predicted. "My brother has placed us both in a difficult position," William said finally. "Him through his actions, me through my obligations." "Family loyalty against professional duty," Samuel observed. "Precisely." William paced slowly. "I've spent 10 years building a reputation for fairness in territorial law enforcement. Thomas threatens that with his methods. Yet he's your brother." "Yes, my younger brother, who I failed to guide properly after our father died." Real regret colored William's voice. "I thought the war had straightened him out. Clearly, I was wrong." Samuel waited, sensing there was more to this confession. "I've seen the medical report Dr. Harrison prepared," William continued, "and the financial records Mr. Pierce uncovered. Together with the territorial investigators' findings regarding Judge Williams, they paint a disturbing picture." He met Samuel's gaze directly. "I cannot officially intervene in what remains legally a domestic matter between husband and wife, but I can ensure that judicial corruption does not taint the proceedings." Meaning Judge Williams has been temporarily relieved of his duties pending investigation. All his recent rulings, including those regarding Mrs. Carter, have been suspended. William's expression remained professionally neutral. "This creates a legal vacuum that benefits your position temporarily. And Thomas knows this." "He does. He's not taking it well." For the first time, emotion cracked the marshal's professional veneer. "My brother was always difficult, spoiled by our mother after father died. But I never imagined he would become—" He trailed off. "Abusive," Samuel finished for him. William nodded stiffly. "It shames me deeply, both personally and as a lawman." Yet you can't officially intervene. No, but I can remain in town longer than planned, can ensure that proper legal procedures are followed. William straightened professionalism returning. And I can tell you unofficially that Thomas has been meeting with Blackwood's security team. They're planning something beyond legal channels. Samuel wasn't surprised. When, soon, Thomas was erratic, not sharing details even with me, but he mentioned settling matters before the week is out. William moved toward the door, then paused. Captain McGraw, I fought against you once. I don't wish to find us on opposite sides again, but Thomas is still my brother despite his failings. I understand family loyalty, Marshal. I also understand that sometimes the hardest duty is standing against those we love when they've lost their way. William nodded, acknowledging the point. Watch your back, Captain, and hers. He departed without further discussion, leaving Samuel with the unsettling reality that even this potential ally remained constrained by blood ties. When Samuel returned to the porch, he found Evelyn in earnest conversation with Pierce. Legal divorce proceedings in Colorado Territory, Pierce was explaining. With evidence of physical abuse documented by a medical professional, the courts there are more progressive. How long would it take? Evelyn asked. 3 months minimum, during which you'd need to establish residency. 3 months? She echoed, shoulders sagging slightly. Samuel joined them. What did Marshal Carter say? Harrison asked. Thomas is planning something outside legal channels. Soon. Samuel kept his voice matter-of-fact. The Marshal can't officially intervene, but he's ensured all Judge Williams's rulings are temporarily suspended. Small favors, Harrison muttered. It buys us time, Samuel pointed out. Time for Colonel Henderson to pressure the railroad commissioners regarding Blackwood's methods. Evelyn turned to him, determination in her eyes. Samuel, my offer stands. It's the cleanest solution for everyone. Except you, he countered. I've endured worse. That's not a justification for enduring more. Samuel was surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. No, we find another way. Pierce cleared his throat. There is one other possibility. Radical, perhaps, but legally sound. He hesitated. Marriage. Silence met his suggestion. To another man, Pierce clarified unnecessarily. In certain circumstances, when a wife has been abandoned or endangered, courts have recognized subsequent marriages as valid, particularly with evidence of the first husband's misconduct. That's extremely rare, Harrison objected. But not unprecedented, Pierce insisted, especially in territories still establishing their legal frameworks. With Marshal Carter ensuring proper procedure, it would still require a willing participant, Harrison pointed out. Someone to serve as the second husband. All eyes turned to Samuel, whose expression remained carefully neutral. A marriage of convenience, Evelyn said softly, to secure legal protection. The proposal hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was prepared to voice. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, a door long closed, creaking slightly open. It would be temporary, Pierce added. A legal maneuver until proper divorce proceedings could be completed in Colorado. Samuel found himself unable to respond immediately. The suggestion touched too many complicated emotions. His commitment to Evelyn's safety, his memories of Sarah, the unexpected connection that had developed between them during these difficult days. I need to check the cattle, he said abruptly, and strode from the porch, feeling their eyes on his back. The afternoon stretched long as Samuel moved through ranch chores, with mechanical precision, his mind elsewhere. The practical aspects of Pierce's suggestion made logical sense, a legal shield, that would supersede Thomas's claims. But marriage, even one of convenience, meant something profound to Samuel. His years with Sarah had been built on love and shared dreams, not tactical considerations. Yet something about Evelyn had worked its way under his defenses. Her courage, her resilience in the face of cruelty, the quiet dignity with which she faced each new challenge. These were qualities Samuel had always valued, qualities that reminded him uncomfortably of feelings he'd believed buried with Sarah. As sunset painted the western sky, Samuel found himself at the twin graves beneath the cottonwood tree. He knelt, removing his hat, the evening breeze cool against his face. "Sarah," he said softly to the weathered stone, "I could use your counsel now." Only the rustling leaves answered, yet Samuel found a measure of peace in the simple act of acknowledgement. Sarah had been practical, forward-thinking. She would have understood the necessity of protecting someone vulnerable, whatever that required. He was so absorbed in thought that he didn't hear Evelyn's approach until she stood beside him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding." Samuel rose, dusting off his knees. "Just having a conversation with old ghosts." Evelyn's gaze moved to the smaller gravestone. "Your son was very young." "Too young for war," Samuel agreed, "but old enough to believe in something bigger than himself." "Like his father." Samuel shook his head. "I was a different man then, believed the world was clearer than it is. And now I understand that right and wrong aren't always found on opposite sides of a battle line." He looked at her directly. "Pierce's suggestion is merely a practical solution," Evelyn finished for him. "Nothing more need be implied or expected." Samuel studied her face in the fading light, noting how the bruises had continued to heal, how her natural beauty emerged more clearly each day. Something tightened in his chest, an emotion he wasn't prepared to name. "It would mean something to me," he said finally. "Marriage always does." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly at his honesty. Before she could respond, Jacob's urgent voice called from the direction of the house. "Samuel Ryder's approaching from town." The moment shattered. Samuel turned toward the house, instinctively placing himself between Evelyn and potential danger. "Stay behind me." They hurried back to find Jacob and Harrison on the porch, faces grim. In the distance, a group of mounted men approached, torches visible in the gathering dusk. "Thomas?" Samuel asked. Jacob nodded. "And Blackwood's men. At least 10 riders. Armed, very." Samuel made quick calculations. 4 defenders against 10 or more attackers. Poor odds under any circumstances. "This isn't a legal proceeding," Harrison said grimly. "This is a raid." Samuel turned to Evelyn, whose face had gone pale but determined. "Hide in the root cellar. Jacob knows where." "I won't cower while you risk your lives," she objected. "This isn't up for debate." Samuel's voice brooked no argument. "Jacob, get her to safety. Doctor, you should leave while you can. This isn't your fight." Harrison straightened his aging frame. "I've patched up too many of Thomas Carter's victims to stand aside now." The approaching riders drew closer, their torches cutting through the twilight. Samuel could make out Thomas at the front riding beside Daniels. The time for legal maneuvering had passed. Thomas had chosen force, and Samuel would have to meet it. He retrieved the Colt revolver from inside, checking it methodically before returning to the porch. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar in his hand, a piece of his past he'd hoped never to reclaim. "Samuel McGrath." Thomas's voice carried across the yard as the riders halted at a cautious distance. "Send out my wife, and we'll leave peacefully. Resist, and we burn everything to the ground. Samuel stepped forward alone, revolver held loosely at his side. "There's been enough violence, Thomas. The territorial marshal your own brother is investigating. This won't end well for you." "William has always been weak," Thomas sneered. "Too concerned with appearances and procedure. Some matters require direct action." He gestured to the men around him. "Last chance, McGraw. Send her out now." "She's not here," Samuel lied, hoping to draw them away from the house. "I took her to Colorado Territory 3 days ago. She's filing for divorce as we speak." Thomas's laugh held no humor. "A convenient claim, one easily verified by searching your property." He nodded to Daniels. "Burn the outbuildings first, then the house." 2 riders moved forward with torches heading toward the remaining storage sheds. Samuel raised the revolver, aiming deliberately above their heads, and fired a warning shot. "That's far enough," he called. "This is private property. You're trespassing." The riders hesitated, looking to Daniels for direction. Thomas's face contorted with rage. "You think one old soldier can stop us? You're outnumbered and outgunned, McGraw." "Perhaps," a new voice called from the darkness to the right of the house. "But he's not alone." Marshal William Carter emerged from the shadows accompanied by his deputy and Sheriff Jackson. All 3 men were armed and positioned strategically. William, Thomas's surprise, quickly hardened to contempt. "Come to interfere again, brother?" "Come to uphold the law," William replied evenly. "These men," he gestured to Blackwood's security force, "have no legal authority here. This is attempted arson at minimum, possibly attempted murder." "She's my wife," Thomas shouted, control slipping. "The law gives me the right—" "No law gives you the right to burn a man's property or threaten his life," William countered. "Stand down, Thomas. Now, before this becomes something none of us can walk away from." The brothers locked eyes across the yard, decades of complicated history passing between them. Samuel watched Thomas closely, recognizing the dangerous calculation behind his gaze. "Daniels," Thomas said finally, not breaking eye contact with his brother, "show the marshal what happens to men who interfere with private business matters." Everything happened at once. Daniels drew his weapon with practiced speed, aiming not at the marshal, but at Samuel. William shouted a warning. Samuel dove sideways as the shot cracked through the evening air. Pain exploded across Samuel's left shoulder as the bullet found its mark. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the breath from his lung. Through a haze of pain he heard shouting, more gunshots, the thunder of hooves. "Samuel!" Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos. She had emerged from hiding and now ran toward him, heedless of danger. "Get down," he managed, trying to regain his feet. She reached him just as Thomas broke from the confused melee of riders spurring his horse directly toward them. His face was a mask of pure hatred as he reached down, intending to grab Evelyn as he passed. Samuel lunged upward, despite his wounded shoulder, pushing Evelyn aside and throwing himself into the path of Thomas's horse. The animal reared Thomas, cursing as he struggled for control. Samuel raised his revolver, aiming not at Thomas, but at the ground before the horse. He fired the shot, causing the already panicked animal to rear higher. Thomas lost his grip and tumbled backward from the saddle, hitting the ground hard. The fall drove the breath from him, but he rolled quickly, drawing a small derringer from his boot. "Thomas, no!" William's voice rang out. But Thomas was beyond reason, his face contorted with rage as he aimed at Samuel. 2 shots cracked nearly simultaneously. Samuel felt the heat of Thomas's bullet as it passed inches from his head. The second shot came from William's revolver. Thomas staggered, looking down in disbelief at the spreading crimson stain on his chest. He turned toward his brother, confusion replacing rage before collapsing to his knees. "Will?" he gasped, and then crumpled completely. The yard fell silent save for the nervous whickering of horses and the labored breathing of wounded men. William Carter stood frozen, revolver still extended, his face a study in shocked disbelief. He had shot his own brother to prevent Samuel's murder. Daniels and the remaining security men had drawn back calculation, replacing aggression as they assessed this unexpected turn. Without Thomas driving them forward, their motivation evaporated. "It's over," Sheriff Jackson announced, moving to secure Thomas's fallen form. "Daniels, tell your men to withdraw. Now." Blackwood's security chief nodded curtly, gesturing to his team. They departed without protest, professional enough to recognize a lost cause. Samuel felt Evelyn's hands helping him to sit, examining his wounded shoulder with surprising composure. "It's through the muscle," she reported. "Clean exit wound." William approached slowly, holstering his weapon with mechanical precision. He knelt beside his brother's body, checking for signs of life that both men knew were not there. "He gave me no choice," William said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "You saved my life," Samuel replied. "And probably Evelyn's." "At the cost of my brother's." William's expression was unreadable. Family against duty. In the end, there was no contest. He rose, straightening to his full height. "Sheriff, secure the scene. Deputy, ride for the undertaker." As Harrison tended to Samuel's wound, Evelyn remained at his side, her hand finding his uninjured one. Their fingers interlaced naturally, a simple gesture that communicated more than words could express. "It's over," she whispered. But Samuel, watching William Carter's rigid back, as the marshal arranged his brother's body with gentle hands, knew better. Some endings were really beginnings in disguise, and the repercussions of this night would echo through all their lives in ways none could yet predict. "Not quite," he replied softly, "but we've crossed the hardest ground." The sun had fully set now, leaving them in darkness, broken only by dropped torches guttering in the dirt. Dawn would bring a different world than the one they had known. A world with new possibilities, new challenges, and the chance, however fragile, for something neither had dared imagine before. The funeral of Thomas Carter drew a smaller crowd than might befit a town councilman. They gathered under a sky threatening rain, faces solemn but largely devoid of genuine grief. Mayor Peterson delivered a brief eulogy praising Thomas's contributions to Centennial City's growth, carefully avoiding any mention of the circumstances surrounding his death. Samuel stood at the periphery, arm in a sling, his presence both a courtesy to Marshal William Carter and a statement to the town. Evelyn remained at the ranch, her absence a foregone conclusion that required no explanation. William conducted himself with rigid dignity throughout the service, accepting condolences with stoic nods. Only once did his composure waver when the casket was lowered into Kansas soil. A flicker of pain crossed his weathered features before discipline reasserted itself. As the gathering dispersed, Samuel approached the marshal, who stood alone by the fresh grave. "Marshal Carter," William nodded acknowledgement. "Captain McGraw, your shoulder. Healing. Dr. Harrison says I was fortunate." "Indeed." William's gaze remained on his brother's grave. "More fortunate than Thomas." The simple truth hung between them, weighted with implications neither man could fully articulate. William had chosen justice over blood duty, over family loyalty, a decision Samuel understood better than most. "I won't insult you by saying I'm sorry for your loss," Samuel said finally, "but I recognize the sacrifice you made." Do you? William's voice held no accusation, only genuine inquiry. Have you ever killed your own blood captain? No, Samuel admitted. My son died at Gettysburg before I could reach him. Different kind of loss. William nodded, accepting this. Thomas was always troubled. Even as a boy, something essential was missing in him. My father recognized it, tried to instill principles, boundaries. After he died, Mother indulged Thomas's worst qualities. I was already in the army, couldn't intervene. A heavy sigh escaped him. I tell myself that to ease the burden, that Thomas was broken long before that night. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then steadier, but neither man moved. What happens now? Samuel asked. Legally, the investigation continues. Judge Williams has resigned rather than face prosecution for corruption. Blackwood's connection to Thomas is being examined by territorial authorities. William finally turned to face Samuel directly. But you're not asking about legalities, are you? No, Samuel acknowledged. I'm asking about Mrs. Carter, about her position now. Widow Carter, legally speaking, William corrected. Thomas's death simplifies certain aspects. She inherits his property, limited, though it may be after his dealings with Blackwood are untangled. He studied Samuel's expression carefully. Though I suspect her living arrangements may already be established. Samuel met his gaze steadily. She's recovering at my ranch until matters settle. Nothing improper. Of course, William replied, a hint of understanding beneath his official tone. I'll be departing for Denver tomorrow. The territorial governor has questions about this entire affair. My report will reflect the truth as I witnessed it. Thomas attempted murder and was stopped with necessary force. I appreciate that. Don't. William's voice hardened slightly. I don't do it for appreciation. I do it because it's true. Because even family doesn't place a man above justice. He extended his hand. Good day, Captain McGraw. They shook hands, a gesture of mutual respect between former adversaries, now linked by circumstances neither had chosen. As William walked away, Franklin Pierce approached notebook, conspicuously absent for once. Blackwood left on the morning train, Pierce informed Samuel without preamble, bound for Chicago according to the station master. Running from the investigation. Strategic retreat more likely. He'll resurface once the immediate scrutiny fades. Pierce lowered his voice despite the empty cemetery. The bank foreclosure notice against your ranch has been withdrawn, quite suddenly with no explanation. Samuel's eyebrows rose. Blackwood's influence? Possibly. Or perhaps the territorial investigation into financial improprieties has bankers nervous about questionable transactions. Pierce smiled thinly. Regardless, your property appears secure for now. And your newspaper, surprisingly unmolested. It seems our railroad baron values discretion above vengeance. Pierce adjusted his hat against the increasing rain. Though I wouldn't consider the matter fully resolved. Men like Blackwood play long games. They walked together toward town, the rain soaking through Samuel's coat, aggravating his wounded shoulder. The pain felt almost appropriate, a physical manifestation of the toll these weeks had taken. How is she? Pierce asked, as they reached the main street. Recovering, Samuel replied. Physically, at least. The other wounds take longer. And between you, Samuel stopped walking, studying the editor's perceptive expression. That's a rather personal inquiry. And forgive me. Pierce didn't look particularly repentant. Professional curiosity. The widow and her protector make quite the story, especially given recent events. There is no story, Samuel said firmly. Only people trying to rebuild their lives. Of course. Pierce's smile suggested he understood more than Samuel had said. Though I feel compelled to mention that social conventions in these matters are surprisingly flexible on the frontier. Appropriate mourning periods tend to accommodate practical realities. Before Samuel could respond, Sheriff Jackson emerged from his office across the street, gesturing urgently. Something in his expression sent Samuel hurrying over Pierce, following. "Telegram from Colorado," Jackson said without greeting, handing over the yellow paper. "Arrived 10 minutes ago. Thought you should see it immediately." Samuel read quickly, dread building with each word. Blackwood arrived. Denver. Stop meeting with railroad commissioners. Stop. Henderson detained on questionable charges. Stop. Evidence seized. Stop. Advise caution. Stop. William Nelson, aide to Henderson. Stop. Blackwood moves quickly, Pierce observed, reading over Samuel's shoulder, and effectively, Samuel added grimly, without Henderson and his evidence against Blackwood's methods. The investigation stalls, Jackson finished, and without that pressure, Samuel refolded the telegram, mind racing. "When's the next train to Denver?" "Tomorrow morning," Jackson replied. But Samuel rushing to Colorado won't help Henderson. Blackwood has connections throughout the territory, legal connections. Perhaps, Samuel conceded. But Henderson has the truth, and documentation if we can locate his copies. "Dangerous ground," Pierce warned. "Blackwood doesn't play by gentlemen's rules." "Neither do I," Samuel replied. "Not anymore, Tata. The ranch house was quiet when Samuel returned, the rain having given way to heavy mist that shrouded the landscape. He found Evelyn in the kitchen with Martha, both women up to their elbows in bread dough. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force, its simple normalcy a stark contrast to the gathering storm. Evelyn looked up, flour dusting her cheek, a smile warming her features before she registered his expression. "What's happened?" she asked immediately. Samuel handed her the telegram, watching comprehension dawn as she read. "Henderson," she said quietly. "Blackwood's moving against everyone who opposed him." "Starting with the most influential," Samuel confirmed. "Without Henderson's evidence and testimony, the territorial investigation loses its foundation." Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll fetch Jacob. He'll want to hear this." And once the four of them gathered around the kitchen table, Samuel outlined the situation Henderson detained in Denver Blackwood meeting with railroad commissioners, the withdrawn foreclosure notice that now seemed more strategic than conciliatory. "It's a temporary retreat," Samuel concluded. Blackwood eliminated Thomas as a liability, then moved to neutralize Henderson. He'll return for the ranch once the investigation collapses. Without Thomas driving him, why continue this fight? Jacob asked. Plenty of other land along the proposed route. Pride? Evelyn suggested. Samuel defied him publicly. Men like Blackwood don't forget such insults. And practicality, Samuel added. Our water access remains valuable for the railroad. The original motivation hasn't changed, only the methods. So what's our move? Jacob asked, the old soldier in him responding to strategic thinking. I go to Denver, Samuel decided. Tomorrow. Find Henderson's associate Nelson, locate copies of the evidence. You're still healing, Evelyn objected, gesturing to his sling. The journey alone could reopen your wound. It's a risk I'll have to take. We'll have to take, Evelyn corrected firmly. I'm coming with you. Samuel shook his head. Too dangerous. Blackwood's men will be watching for anyone connected to Henderson. Which is precisely why I should accompany you, Evelyn countered. A man traveling alone draws attention. A couple on personal business does not. She's right, Jacob acknowledged. Better cover, Samuel studied Evelyn's determined expression, recognizing the steel beneath her composed exterior. The traumatized woman he'd found in that abandoned wagon seemed lifetimes removed from the person before him, now capable, resolute, and fiercely intelligent. "Very well," he conceded. "We leave on the morning train. Jacob, you and Martha maintain the ranch. If we're not back in 10 days, we'll come looking," Jacob promised. That evening, as Samuel checked and packed his revolver, Evelyn appeared in the doorway of his study. She had changed into a simple dark dress, her hair arranged modestly, the very picture of a respectable widow. "Do I look sufficiently inconspicuous?" she asked, a hint of forced lightness in her tone. "You look—" Samuel hesitated, propriety warring with honesty. "You could never look inconspicuous." Color touched her cheeks at the implicit compliment. "I found this among Sarah's things," she explained. "I hope you don't mind." She would have wanted it used. Samuel returned to his packing, suddenly conscious of the intimate nature of their imminent journey. "Evelyn, when we reach Denver, circumstances may require us to present as husband and wife," she finished for him. "I understand. A practical necessity." Yes, practical. The word felt inadequate to the complexities between them, the shared dangers, the growing connection, neither had acknowledged directly. Evelyn moved further into the room, her fingers tracing the edge of his desk. "Samuel, before we depart, there's something we should discuss. Something we've been avoiding." Samuel stilled, knowing instinctively what she meant. "The future," she continued when he remained silent. "After Denver. After Blackwood." "If there is an after," he said quietly. "There will be." Her certainty was compelling. "But what shape it takes, that's what we haven't spoken of." Samuel turned to face her, fully allowing himself to truly see her not as a victim he'd rescued, or a widow in mourning, but as a woman of remarkable courage standing at a crossroads. "What shape would you want it to take?" he asked, surprising himself with the directness of the question. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "One that includes this place, and you," the simple words offered without artifice. "If that's something you might want as well." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Samuel found himself standing on the precipice of a possibility he'd never expected to encounter again after burying Sarah. "I would," he said finally, the words feeling insufficient to the magnitude of what they represented. "Very much." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression, relief perhaps, or the quiet joy of possibility after years of confinement. She moved closer, close enough that Samuel could detect the faint scent of flower and lavender soap. "Then we have additional reason to succeed in Denver," she said softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, with gentle deliberation, Evelyn placed her hand against his cheek, the touch conveying what words could not yet express. Samuel covered her hand with his own, allowing himself to accept the connection. The first step toward a future neither had dared imagine weeks earlier. "We should rest," he said finally. "Early train tomorrow." Evelyn nodded, withdrawing her hand slowly. "Good night, Samuel." After she departed, Samuel remained motionless, the phantom warmth of her touch lingering on his skin. Tomorrow, they would confront Blackwood's machinations in Denver. But tonight, something equally momentous had transpired, the acknowledgement of possibilities that transcended their difficult circumstances. Denver sprawled across the landscape with the brash confidence of a city convinced of its own importance. After the relative quiet of Centennial City, the noise and bustle struck Samuel as almost overwhelming. Carriages and wagons clogged the streets, men in business attire hurried along boardwalks, and the constant rhythm of construction punctuated every corner. "It's changed," Samuel observed as they disembarked. Bigger than when I visited Henderson. Thomas always spoke of Denver as the future, Evelyn said, adjusting her modest hat. Said Centennial City was merely a stepping stone to greater opportunities here. Samuel secured their minimal luggage and engaged a hackney to transport them to the modest hotel Pierce had recommended, respectable but not prominent enough to attract undue attention. "We need to locate William Nelson," Samuel said once they were settled in their adjoining rooms. "Henderson's aide. He sent the telegram." "The Railroad Commission offices would be the logical starting point," Evelyn suggested. "If Henderson was meeting with them before his detention, too obvious. Blackwood will have men watching those buildings." Samuel considered their limited options. Henderson mentioned a private club he frequented, the Prospectors' Society on Larimer Street. Members only, but they might know Nelson. They ventured out into the afternoon bustle, maintaining the appearance of a married couple on legitimate business. Samuel kept his injured arm in the sling, a visible explanation for their subdued pace through the crowded streets. The Prospectors' Society occupied an imposing stone building with discreet brass fixtures and windows designed to prevent casual observation from the street. A liveried doorman blocked their approach. "Members only, sir," he stated flatly. "We're looking for William Nelson," Samuel explained. "Associate of Colonel James Henderson. It's a personal matter of some urgency." The doorman's expression remained impassive. "I'm not at liberty to confirm or deny any gentleman's membership, sir." "Perhaps this might help your recollection," Samuel suggested, pressing a silver dollar into the man's gloved palm. The doorman pocketed the coin with practiced smoothness. "I still cannot confirm membership, sir. However, I might mention that gentlemen seeking mining investments often visit the Conway Hotel bar in the evenings, particularly around 7 o'clock. Samuel nodded, understanding. "Much obliged." As they turned away, Evelyn gripped Samuel's arm suddenly. "The man across the street," she whispered. "By the tobacconist. I recognize him from Blackwood's security team." Samuel risked a casual glance, identifying Daniels's distinctive posture immediately. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, mutual recognition flashing between them. "He's seen us," Samuel said quietly. "Walk normally. Don't rush." They proceeded at an unhurried pace, but Samuel could feel Daniels's gaze following them down the block. When they rounded the corner, Samuel guided Evelyn into a busy mercantile. "We've been compromised," he said, positioning them among shelves of dry goods. "Daniels will report to Blackwood immediately." "What now?" Evelyn asked, voice steady despite the danger. "We split up," Samuel decided. "You return to the hotel through the service entrance. I'll create a diversion, then meet Nelson as planned." "Too risky," Evelyn objected. "Your shoulder is functional enough," Samuel interrupted. "Evelyn, please. I need to know you're safe while I handle Daniels." Something in his tone must have conveyed the urgency, because she nodded reluctantly. 7 o'clock at the Conway. If you're not there by 8, I find Marshal Carter." "Agreed." Samuel hesitated, then squeezed her hand. "Be careful." After ensuring Evelyn departed safely through the rear of the store, Samuel exited onto the main street, deliberately making himself visible. As expected, Daniels had positioned himself across the thoroughfare, watching with predatory patience. Samuel set a brisk pace toward the busier commercial district, weaving through crowds, occasionally glancing back, to confirm Daniels followed at a discreet distance. The game of hunter and hunted continued for several blocks, until Samuel ducked into the grand lobby of the Territorial Administration Building. The expansive marble space bustled with official business clerks and petitioners moving between various departments. Samuel approached an information desk, engaging the clerk in animated conversation while positioning himself to monitor the entrance. Daniels appeared moments later, scanning the lobby with professional thoroughness. Samuel waited until their eyes met, then deliberately moved toward a side corridor, inviting pursuit. The narrow hallway led to less trafficked offices. Samuel increased his pace, turning corners until he found what he sought, a maintenance access with multiple corridors. He pressed himself against the wall beside a junction, drawing his revolver, the weight familiar in his hand. Footsteps approached, measured, cautious. Daniels had abandoned pretense, his hunter's instincts engaged. As he rounded the corner, Samuel stepped forward, pressing the revolver into the security man's ribs. "Quietly now," Samuel instructed. Daniels froze, professional enough to recognize his disadvantage. "McGraw," he acknowledged without surprise. "Bold move confronting me directly. I prefer to address problems at their source." Samuel relieved him of his sidearm. Hands against the wall. Daniels complied, his movements controlled. "Blackwood expected you might come to Denver. Said you were predictably honorable." "Where's Henderson?" "Detained. Territorial jail. Fraud accusations." "Manufactured charges," Samuel suggested. Daniels shrugged, unconcerned. "Not my department. I just provide security." "And track people for Blackwood," Samuel added, "like now." Professional services professionally delivered. Despite his compromised position, Daniels maintained his composure. No personal stake in Blackwood's ventures. "Then you won't mind delivering a message," Samuel said. "Tell Blackwood I have copies of Henderson's documentation. Tell him I'm meeting with territorial officials tomorrow morning." Daniels's eyebrows rose slightly. "Bluffing, Captain." "Care to wager your employer's future on that assumption?" Samuel pressed the revolver more firmly against Daniels's ribs. "Now, we're going to walk calmly to the rear exit. You'll proceed to Blackwood with my message, and I'll retain your weapon as assurance of your cooperation." "Blackwood won't be intimidated," Daniels warned as they moved toward the exit. "Even with Henderson's documentation." "I don't seek to intimidate," Samuel replied, "only to balance the scales of justice." At the rear service door, Samuel stepped back, maintaining his aim. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Daniels." The security man straightened his jacket with dignity. "A professional courtesy, Captain McGraw. Watch your back. Blackwood employs others besides me less restrained in their methods." "Noted." Samuel watched until Daniels disappeared around a corner, then secured the man's revolver in his belt. The confrontation had been risky, but necessary. Now Blackwood would react to misinformation, potentially creating an opportunity. The Conway Hotel exuded faded elegance, its once grand lobby now slightly worn at the edges. The bar occupied a wood-paneled room off the main entrance, populated by a mix of travelers and local businessmen. Samuel arrived precisely at 7, scanning the occupants with careful attention. He identified his target almost immediately, a young man in a well-tailored but conservative suit nursing a whiskey alone at a corner table. The man's watchful posture and strategic seating choice marked him as someone expecting trouble. Samuel approached directly, noting the slight tensing of the man's shoulders as he registered the newcomer. "William Nelson?" Samuel inquired quietly. The young man's hand drifted toward his lapel. "Who's asking?" "Samuel McGraw, friend of Colonel Henderson. You sent a telegram to Centennial City." Recognition flashed in Nelson's eyes, followed by cautious relief. "Captain McGraw, the colonel spoke highly of you." His gaze moved past Samuel. "You came alone?" "For the moment. My companion will join us shortly." Samuel settled into the chair opposite Nelson, positioning himself to monitor the entrance. "What's Henderson's situation?" Nelson leaned forward, voice lowered. "Detained on fabricated charges. Blackwood arranged for financial documents to be Discovered, suggesting the colonel misappropriated mining investors' funds. Believable enough to stick. Temporarily. The colonel has influential friends, but Blackwood moved quickly, securing a sympathetic judge. Nelson's expression darkened. They seized all documentation from the colonel's offices, everything related to Blackwood's land acquisition methods. Everything, Samuel pressed. A slight smile touched Nelson's features. Everything they found. The colonel anticipated potential interference, maintained duplicate records off-site. Hope stirred in Samuel's chest. You have them? Not with me, Nelson replied cautiously. Secured location, but accessing them will be complicated. Blackwood's men are watching known associates of the colonel, including me. I encountered one earlier, man named Daniels. Nelson nodded. Blackwood's chief of security. Dangerous man by reputation. We've met before, Samuel said dryly. What's Blackwood's larger game? This extends beyond Centennial City. Much beyond, Nelson confirmed, signaling for another round. The Railroad Commission is voting next week on access rights across 3 territories. Blackwood represents a consortium of Eastern investors seeking controlling interest in key water and passage rights. The colonel's evidence proves Blackwood has been systematically corrupting local officials and intimidating property owners along proposed routes. Enough to stop the commission's approval, if presented properly with supporting testimony, which is precisely why Blackwood needed the colonel neutralized before the vote. Nelson accepted fresh drinks from the server before continuing. Your situation in Centennial City was merely one piece of a much larger pattern. Samuel absorbed this understanding, now the true scale of their opposition. Blackwood wasn't simply a land speculator targeting his ranch. He was an architect of corruption across multiple territories, manipulating the very framework of frontier development. Captain McGraw. The quiet female voice drew both men's attention. Evelyn stood beside their table, her composed demeanor betraying nothing of their earlier complications. Samuel rose immediately. Mrs. Carter, please join us. This is William Nelson, Colonel Henderson's associate. Nelson stood, offering a respectful bow. Ma'am, the captain didn't mention he was traveling with a companion. A recent development, Evelyn replied smoothly, settling into the chair Samuel held for her. I understand Colonel Henderson is in difficulty. Manufactured difficulty, Nelson confirmed, but problematic nonetheless. Samuel noted Nelson's appraising glance at Evelyn, reading the unspoken question in the young man's expression. Mrs. Carter's late husband was Thomas Carter Blackwood's agent in Centennial City. She has first-hand knowledge of their operations. Understanding dawned in Nelson's eyes. I see. Then your insights could prove valuable, Mrs. Carter. Thomas kept detailed records, Evelyn offered, including correspondence with Blackwood regarding land acquisitions. I managed his accounts. You have these records? Nelson asked, interest sharpening. Not with me, Evelyn admitted, but I know where they're kept. A hidden compartment in his desk at the blacksmith shop. Samuel turned to her, surprised. You never mentioned this. There wasn't opportunity, Evelyn said simply. Events moved quickly after Thomas's death. Nelson's expression brightened with strategic calculation. Combined with the colonel's documentation, such records would create a compelling case before the commission. If we can access either, Samuel pointed out. Blackwood's men are watching both locations. Perhaps, Nelson acknowledged, but they can't watch everywhere simultaneously. He withdrew a small notebook, writing quickly. The colonel's documentation is secured at this address. The caretaker's name is Howard Mitchell. Present this note and he'll provide access. Samuel accepted the folded paper. And Henderson. can he be legally extracted before the commission vote? His lawyer is pursuing options, but Blackwood's influence runs deep. The judge has denied bail. Nelson's expression turned grave. Our best strategy remains presenting the evidence directly to the commission with or without the colonel's personal testimony. When is the vote? Evelyn asked. 5 days from now, Monday morning. Nelson finished his drink. The documentation must be presented no later than Sunday afternoon to be considered. Samuel calculated rapidly. We'd need to return to Centennial City for Thomas's records, then back to Denver with everything before Sunday. Tight schedule. And dangerous, Nelson added. Blackwood will be watching the trains, the telegraph offices. Then we avoid obvious routes, Samuel decided. Private transportation, different approaches. A commotion near the hotel entrance interrupted their planning. Raised voices, the sound of heavy footsteps. Samuel tensed, hand moving instinctively toward his revolver. Back entrance, Nelson instructed, rising casually. Through the kitchen. I'll create a diversion. Samuel helped Evelyn to her feet, maintaining an unhurried pace as they moved toward the rear of the establishment. Behind them, Nelson approached the bar with animated gestures, drawing attention with a suddenly boisterous manner. They navigated through the kitchen despite protests from staff emerging into an alley behind the hotel, just as shouts erupted from the main entrance. Samuel guided Evelyn deeper into the warren of service passages between buildings. Blackwood's men? Evelyn asked as they hurried through the gathering darkness. Most likely, Samuel confirmed. Daniels must have reported to him sooner than anticipated. They emerged onto a parallel street less trafficked than the main thoroughfare. Samuel flagged down a passing cab, helping Evelyn inside before casting a final glance behind them. No pursuit was visible, but the sense of closing danger remained palpable. The rail yard, Samuel instructed the driver. Eastern freight entrance. As the cab pulled away, Evelyn gripped Samuel's arm. Not our hotel. Too obvious, he explained. They'll check passenger accommodations first. We need alternative transportation back to Centennial City. The freight trains, Evelyn realized. Samuel nodded. Less comfortable, but less monitored. We can arrange passage with a cargo master. Many supplement their income by transporting travelers who prefer discretion to comfort. Evelyn studied him with newfound appreciation. You've done this before. During the war, he acknowledged. Intelligence operations occasionally required unorthodox travel arrangements. The cab deposited them at the sprawling rail yard, a labyrinth of tracks, warehouses, and freight cars. Samuel oriented himself quickly, identifying the office of the night yard master. Inside, a grizzled older man, bent over, manifests barely glanced up at their entrance. Passenger services at the main terminal, he grunted. Samuel placed a gold double eagle on the desk. Freight alternatives for travelers preferring discretion. The yardmaster's attention sharpened, assessing both the coin and the couple before him. Eastbound or westbound? East. Centennial City. Cargo train departs midnight. Cattle car converted for guard use. Basic accommodations, no questions. The yardmaster pocketed the coin. Loading platform 3, identify yourself to Conductor Morris. Another double eagle for him. Much obliged, Samuel replied. Well, outside, they settled in the shadows of a storage building to await the departure time. The night had turned cool, and Evelyn shivered slightly, despite her coat. Here, Samuel removed his jacket, draping it around her shoulders. You'll get cold, she protested weakly. Military training, he replied with a small smile. Enduring discomfort is a specialized skill. Evelyn accepted the coat, drawing it closer around herself. What happens when we reach Centennial City? Blackwood will anticipate our return. We don't enter town directly, Samuel decided. Jacob can retrieve Thomas's records if we get word to him. and then back to Denver before Sunday, Evelyn calculated. It's going to be very close. We'll make it, Samuel assured her, though the certainty in his voice exceeded his actual confidence. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the rhythmic activities of the rail yard workers, loading cargo engineers inspecting locomotives, the occasional supervisor making rounds with lantern in hand. "I never imagined this," Evelyn said suddenly. "Hiding in a rail yard?" Samuel asked with gentle humor. "Any of it," she clarified. "When I married Thomas, I envisioned a conventional life. Children, social standing, predictable patterns." She shook her head slightly. "Instead, I'm a widow conspiring against railroad interests with a former cavalry officer." "Regrets?" Samuel inquired, voice carefully neutral. Evelyn considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "About Thomas, no. That path led nowhere good. About this current danger." She turned to meet his gaze directly. "Also no. For the first time in years, I'm choosing my direction rather than being driven by circumstance or another's will." The simple declaration struck Samuel powerfully. Despite the peril surrounding them, despite the uncertain outcome of their mission, Evelyn had found something precious: agency over her own destiny. "Freedom carries its own responsibilities," Samuel observed. "Yes," she agreed. "But they're burdens I choose to bear, not ones forced upon me." Movement at the far end of the yard caught Samuel's attention, a group of men moving with purposeful strides between buildings, lanterns casting long shadows. "We should relocate," he said quietly. "Searching parties." They slipped deeper into the maze of rail cars and equipment sheds, working their way gradually toward loading Platform 3. The midnight departure was still hours away, leaving them exposed in territory rapidly filling with Blackwood's searchers. There, Samuel indicated a storage car apparently forgotten on a siding, its door partially open. "Temporary shelter." They squeezed inside, finding the car half filled with crated machinery. Samuel secured the door behind them, leaving it minimally ajar for light and emergency exit. "Not exactly the Palace Hotel," he apologized. "Better company, though," Evelyn replied with unexpected lightness. Samuel chuckled softly, the tension easing between them despite their precarious circumstances. They settled against the crates, shoulders touching in the confined space. "If we succeed," Evelyn said after a while, "what then? Blackwood faces investigation. The Railroad Commission reconsiders its approvals. Henderson is released." Samuel listed. "I meant for us," Evelyn clarified. The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had fully articulated. Samuel chose his words carefully. "That would depend on what you want, Evelyn." "I told you what I want," she reminded him. "A future that includes your ranch. And you." "As my wife?" Samuel asked directly, the darkness somehow making the question easier to voice. "Yes," she answered simply. "If that's what you want as well." Samuel reached for her hand in the dimness, finding it waiting for his. "I do," he said quietly. "Though the timing seems improper by conventional standards," Evelyn completed his thought. "A widow remarrying so quickly." "People would talk," Samuel acknowledged. "Let them," Evelyn replied with newfound conviction. "I've lived too long worrying about others' judgments." Outside voices approached, men calling to each other as they searched methodically through the yard. Samuel and Evelyn fell silent, listening to the danger passing near their hiding place. "They're being thorough," Samuel whispered once the voices receded. "Blackwood must consider us a serious threat." "We are," Evelyn affirmed. "Together." The simple word carried profound meaning in the darkness. Together, they had survived Thomas's violence, Blackwood's machinations, and the upending of both their lives. Together, they now pursued justice against forces that had brought suffering to many beyond themselves. Samuel felt Evelyn's head come to rest against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and exhaustion combined. He adjusted his position to provide better support, his arm circling her protectively. "Rest," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." As Evelyn's breathing gradually steadied into sleep, Samuel remained vigilant, listening for approaching danger, while his mind worked through their precarious situation. Blackwood's resources were vast, his influence extensive. Even with Henderson's documentation and Thomas's records, victory was far from assured. Yet something had shifted fundamentally within Samuel. A purpose rekindled, a future glimpsed where once there had been only solitary existence. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they faced them not as protector and protected, but as equal partners in a cause that transcended their personal circumstances. Outside, a train whistle sounded in the distance, heralding movement in a world constantly pushing westward. Samuel checked his pocket watch in the thin moonlight filtering through the door. 3 hours until their midnight departure. 3 hours until they commenced the next phase of their dangerous journey. 3 hours of fragile safety before they once again confronted the empire Blackwood had built through corruption and intimidation. Samuel settled more comfortably against the crates, Evelyn warm against his side, and prepared for the long vigil. Whatever came next, they would face it together, a commitment as binding as any marriage vow forged in circumstances neither could have anticipated when their paths first crossed at that abandoned wagon on the Kansas plains. The freight train rumbled eastward through the darkness, each rhythmic clack of wheels against track, measuring their progress toward Centennial City. Samuel sat against the converted cattle car wall, Evelyn sleeping fitfully beside him, her head resting on his folded coat. Moonlight filtered through the slats, casting striped shadows across the rough wooden floor. Their fellow travelers, 2 cattle hands returning east, and an elderly peddler kept to themselves, respecting the unspoken code of those choosing alternative transportation. The conductor, Morris, had accepted Samuel's gold coin with nothing more than a nod, asking no questions about the unusual passengers or their business. Samuel's wounded shoulder throbbed in time with the train's motion, a persistent reminder of their narrowing margins. If Blackwood had moved against Henderson in Denver, his reach would certainly extend to Centennial City. Thomas Carter's records remained crucial, but retrieving them without alerting Blackwood's agents would require careful planning. Evelyn stirred her eyes, opening to the pre-dawn gloom. "Where are we?" she asked, a voice husky with sleep. "About 2 hours from Centennial City," Samuel replied. "The engineer is pushing hard." She sat up, wincing at the stiffness from their uncomfortable accommodations. "You should have woken me. You need rest, too." "Old habits," Samuel said with a small smile. "Cavalry officers learn to sleep with one eye open." Evelyn straightened her rumpled clothing, attempting to restore some semblance of propriety to her appearance. The gesture struck Samuel as both futile and endearing. Even in these circumstances, certain standards remained important to her. "I've been thinking about Thomas's records," she said, keeping her voice low to avoid waking their companions. "The hidden compartment is beneath his desk at the blacksmith shop. False bottom in the right drawer triggered by pressing the back corner." "Clever," Samuel acknowledged. "Thomas was many things but never careless with his secrets," Evelyn replied. "The compartment contains a ledger detailing his arrangements with Blackwood, including properties targeted for acquisition. Names, dates, methods. Would anyone else know about this hiding place?" Evelyn shook her head. Thomas trusted no one completely, not even Blackwood. "Then we have an advantage," Samuel concluded, "assuming we can access the blacksmith shop undetected." The elderly peddler across from them stirred, clearing his throat meaningfully. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, voice surprisingly cultured for his rough appearance, "but I couldn't help overhearing. You folks have business in Centennial City." Samuel tensed, instantly alert to potential threat. "Just returning home." The peddler nodded, apparently accepting this. "Fine community. I visit quarterly with my wares." He studied them with shrewd eyes. "The blacksmith shop you mentioned, that would be Carter's establishment." Evelyn exchanged a cautious glance with Samuel before responding. "Yeah. Why do you ask?" "Passed through Centennial City 3 days ago, heading west." The peddler stroked his gray beard thoughtfully. "Shop was closed. Sign in the window announcing new ownership pending. Railroad Development Company, if memory serves." "Blackwood," Samuel muttered. "He's consolidating Thomas's assets." "The desk would still be there," Evelyn said quickly. "They wouldn't dispose of the furnishings immediately." "Perhaps," Samuel agreed. "But security would be tighter with railroad ownership." The peddler watched this exchange with obvious curiosity. "Railroad company been buying up properties all through these parts," he offered. "Not always with sellers eager to part with their land, from what I hear." Samuel studied the old man more carefully. "You seem well informed for a traveling salesman." A knowing smile creased the peddler's weathered face. "Eyes and ears open, mouth shut. Best business practice on the frontier." He extended a gnarled hand. "Elijah Caldwell. Sundries and information at your service." "Information?" Evelyn questioned. "For those who value such commodities," Caldwell confirmed. "Railroad companies, land speculators, territorial officials all have interest in knowing who owns what, who sells what, who influences whom." Samuel's suspicion deepened. "And who do you currently inform for Mr. Caldwell?" The old man chuckled. "Direct aren't you good? Wasteful to dance around matters when time presses." He leaned forward slightly. "I've provided occasional insights to Colonel Henderson regarding certain railroad affairs, particularly those involving Jeremiah Blackwood's enterprises." Surprise registered on both Samuel and Evelyn's faces. "You know the Colonel?" Samuel asked. "Known him since he was a lieutenant fresh from West Point," Caldwell confirmed. "I served as civilian scout during the war, less officially thereafter." The pieces aligned in Samuel's mind. "You're not just a peddler. You're Henderson's intelligence network." "One small part of it," Caldwell corrected modestly. "The Colonel maintains various sources throughout the territories. My particular route provides useful observations on railroad development patterns." "Why tell us this?" Evelyn asked, still suspicious. Caldwell's expression turned serious. "Because the Colonel's detention in Denver disrupts established protocols, and because I recognize a cavalry officer's bearing when I see one." He nodded toward Samuel. "Captain McGraw," Samuel supplied cautiously. "Samuel McGraw. This is Mrs. Evelyn Carter." Recognition flickered across the old scout's features. The widow Carter and Captain McGraw. "Well, now that clarifies matters considerably." He settled back against the wall. "The Colonel mentioned your situation in his last correspondence. Said you were a man of exceptional principle, Captain." "You've had recent contact with Henderson," Samuel pressed. "2 weeks ago in Denver, before his unfortunate detention. He anticipated Blackwood might attempt to neutralize him before the commission vote." Caldwell reached into his ragged coat, extracting a sealed envelope. "He asked me to deliver this should our paths cross under certain circumstances." Samuel accepted the envelope, breaking the wax seal carefully. Inside, he found a brief letter in Henderson's distinctive handwriting. "Captain McGraw, If you are reading this, events have proceeded as I feared. Blackwood's reach extends further than we initially calculated. Trust Caldwell, he has served me faithfully for decades. The documentation regarding Blackwood's operations is secure, but accessing it now requires alternative approaches. Nelson has contingency instructions. Most critically, Blackwood's entire enterprise hinges on the upcoming commission vote. Without approval of his water rights applications, his investment consortium withdraws support. He knows this, which makes him particularly dangerous in these final days. Proceed with caution. Justice before vengeance. J. Henderson. Samuel passed the letter to Evelyn, considering its implications. Henderson had anticipated Blackwood's moves with remarkable accuracy, establishing contingencies that might yet salvage their cause. "You're returning to Centennial City for Carter's records," Caldwell observed, "then back to Denver before the commission vote Sunday." "That's the plan," Samuel confirmed, seeing little point in denial. "Ambitious timeline," Caldwell noted, "particularly with Blackwood's men watching the usual routes." "We have limited options," Evelyn pointed out. Caldwell's eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. "Perhaps not as limited as you think." He gestured to the cattle hands sleeping across the car. "Those gentlemen work for the Circle H Ranch outside Centennial City. Owner's an old friend of the Colonel's, Nathan Hollister. Fought at Antietam alongside Henderson." "Another of the Colonel's network," Samuel surmised. "Hollister provides transportation and occasional refuge for the Colonel's associates," Caldwell confirmed. "His ranch borders the northern edge of your property, Captain." Samuel nodded, possibilities expanding. "Cross-country approach, avoiding the town entirely." "Precisely," Caldwell agreed. "I'd suggest you disembark before the Centennial City station. The water stop 10 miles west would be suitable. Hollister's men can guide you to the ranch from there." "And the blacksmith shop?" Evelyn asked. "We still need Thomas's records." "I can help with that," Caldwell offered. "As a regular visitor to town, my presence at various establishments raises no suspicion. With proper direction, I could locate and retrieve the documents you seek." Samuel exchanged a glance with Evelyn, evaluating the unexpected assistance against potential risks. Henderson's trust carried significant weight, yet caution remained essential. "It would be dangerous," Samuel warned. "If Blackwood's men caught you searching the shop," Caldwell waved dismissively. "Captain, I've survived 3 wars, 2 Indian campaigns, and 40 years of frontier living. I assure you I can manage a simple document retrieval without undue attention." His confidence was compelling, and their alternatives remained limited. Samuel nodded slowly. "Very well. Mrs. Carter will provide detailed instructions for locating the hidden compartment." As Evelyn quietly explained the mechanism and location to Caldwell, Samuel watched the landscape gradually brighten with approaching dawn. The familiar Kansas terrain rolled past open prairie, giving way to scattered homesteads as they neared Centennial City. Their improvised plan held significant risks, but Henderson's letter confirmed what Samuel had already intuited: Blackwood's operations were vulnerable during this critical period before the commission vote. If they could combine Thomas's detailed records with Henderson's broader documentation, they might yet expose the entire corrupt enterprise. "We'll need to send telegraph updates to Nelson in Denver," Samuel noted as Evelyn finished her instructions to Caldwell. "Keep him informed of our progress." "Territorial Telegraph Office monitors all transmissions," Caldwell warned. "But the railroad maintains a private wire at Circle H for cattle shipment coordination. Hollister can arrange secure communication." "Then we have a workable approach," Samuel concluded, "assuming all elements align as planned." "Few plans survive first contact with the enemy intact," Caldwell observed with the pragmatism of an experienced campaigner. "Adaptability remains essential." As the train slowed for the water stop west of Centennial City, Samuel helped Evelyn prepare for disembarkation. The cattle hands, now awake and briefed by Caldwell, agreed to guide them cross-country to the Circle H ranch. 12 hours, Samuel instructed Caldwell as they prepared to part ways. Meet us at Hollister's ranch by sunset, with whatever you recover. I'll be there, the old scout promised, with or without the documents. Samuel and Evelyn slipped from the train during the brief stop following the ranch hands toward horses waiting at a nearby corral. Behind them, the train resumed its journey toward Centennial City, carrying Caldwell and their hopes for recovering Thomas's critical evidence. The morning ride across open country proved challenging for Evelyn, unaccustomed to extended time in the saddle. She endured without complaint, maintaining pace beside Samuel as they followed the ranch hands through terrain deliberately chosen to avoid established trails and observation points. By midday, they crested a ridge overlooking Nathan Hollister's substantial cattle operation. The Circle H spread across several thousand acres of prime grazing land, its main compound featuring a large ranch house, bunkhouses, barns, and corrals. A spur railroad line connected the operation directly to the main tracks, evidence of Hollister's successful enterprise. Impressive, Samuel acknowledged as they descended toward the compound. Hollister started with nothing after the war, one of the hands explained. Built all this in 10 years, knows every trick for surviving in cattle country. They were met in the yard by a barrel-chested man with a silver-streaked beard and the unmistakable bearing of a former military officer. Nathan Hollister's handshake was firm, his assessment of his visitors quick and thorough. Captain McGraw, he greeted without preamble. Henderson's told me about you. Said you were one of the few officers who understood both tactics and principle. High praise from the colonel, Samuel replied. Deserved, apparently. Hollister gestured toward the main house. You both look trail-worn. Come inside, refresh yourselves. We can discuss matters over a proper meal. The ranch house interior reflected substantial prosperity, tempered by frontier practicality. Mrs. Hollister, a dignified woman with kind eyes, welcomed Evelyn with immediate sympathy, offering a room to rest and fresh clothing. Over a hearty meal, Samuel outlined their situation and timeline, finding in Hollister a sharp strategic mind and thorough understanding of the regional dynamics. Blackwood's been squeezing smaller ranchers all along the proposed rail expansion, Hollister confirmed, using various intermediaries to hide his direct involvement. Thomas Carter was merely one operative among many. You've avoided his attention, Samuel inquired. Hollister smiled grimly. I established certain deterrents early in our acquaintance, made it clear that any move against Circle H would prove prohibitively costly. He sipped his coffee. Blackwood respects financial calculations, if not moral boundaries. And your railroad connection? Evelyn asked, refreshed, after changing into clean attire provided by Mrs. Hollister. Negotiated directly with the commission 5 years ago, Hollister explained, before Blackwood consolidated his influence. The spur line serves their interests as well as mine. Efficient cattle transport benefits both parties and provides you with private telegraph access, Samuel observed. A necessary business accommodation, Hollister agreed with a knowing smile, occasionally utilized for purposes beyond cattle prices. The conversation turned to immediate logistics. Samuel and Evelyn would remain at Circle H, awaiting Caldwell's return with Thomas's documents. If successful, they would depart immediately for Denver via Hollister's private rail car, bypassing regular stations where Blackwood's men might be watching. The commission meets Monday morning, Hollister noted. Documentation must be formally submitted by Sunday afternoon to be considered. A tight timeline, Samuel acknowledged, but achievable with proper resources. Hollister assured him. My rail car can make Denver by Saturday evening if we depart by tonight's scheduled freight movement. The afternoon passed with tense anticipation as they waited for Caldwell's return. Samuel sent a carefully worded telegraph to Nelson in Denver using Hollister's private wire, confirming their progress without revealing specific details. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Evelyn found Samuel on the ranch house porch, his attention fixed on the approach road from Centennial City. "Any sign?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "Not yet," Samuel replied, concern evident in his voice. "He should have returned by now." Evelyn placed her hand gently on his arm. "Mr. Caldwell struck me as remarkably resourceful. If anyone can navigate Centennial City undetected, it would be him." "True," Samuel acknowledged. "But Blackwood's men are professionals. If they've increased security around the blacksmith shop—" The thought remained unfinished, as a rider appeared in the distance, approaching at a steady pace that suggested neither emergency nor failure. As the figure drew closer, Samuel recognized Caldwell's distinctive posture. "He's returned," he announced, relief evident. They moved to the yard to meet the old scout, who dismounted with surprising agility despite his apparent age. His expression revealed nothing as he approached. "Well," Samuel prompted when Caldwell didn't immediately speak. The scout reached into his coat, extracting a leather-bound ledger. "Hidden exactly where Mrs. Carter described," he reported. "Retrieval accomplished without incident." Evelyn accepted the ledger with trembling hands, opening it to confirm its contents. "Thomas's records," she confirmed. "All his transactions with Blackwood properties targeted for acquisition methods employed payments rendered." Samuel examined several pages, noting the meticulous documentation of what amounted to a systematic campaign of corruption and intimidation. Names, dates, amounts. Thomas had recorded everything with bookkeeper's precision. "Was there difficulty accessing the shop?" Samuel asked Caldwell. "Minimal," the scout replied. "Railroad Development Company has indeed assumed ownership, but maintenance remains limited. I presented myself as a potential buyer of blacksmith equipment, gained entry quite legitimately." A sly smile creased his weathered features. "Amazing how official-looking documentation opens doors." "You weren't followed here," Samuel pressed. "Captain, with all respect, I've been evading pursuit since before you were born." Caldwell seemed genuinely amused by the concern. "I took appropriate precautions, including a convincing performance of continuing westward from Centennial City." Hollister joined them, examining the ledger with professional interest. "Comprehensive documentation," he observed. "Combined with Henderson's broader evidence, this presents a compelling case against Blackwood's entire operation." "If we can get it to Denver in time," Samuel emphasized. "The freight train departs at 9 this evening," Hollister confirmed. "My private car will be attached. We should prepare immediately." As the ranch burst into efficient activity preparing for their departure, Samuel found a quiet moment with Evelyn in Hollister's study. She was examining Thomas's ledger more carefully, her expression troubled. "What is it?" Samuel asked. "The extent of it," she replied softly. "Dozens of properties, hundreds of people affected. Thomas recorded everything: bribes to officials, threats delivered, accidents arranged." She closed the ledger with evident distaste. "I lived with this man Samuel, shared his home, his life, while he orchestrated such systematic cruelty." "You couldn't have known," Samuel offered. "Couldn't I?" Evelyn challenged. "I kept his books, saw the discrepancies, questioned them, and accepted his explanations because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate." Self-recrimination colored her voice. "I was complicit through my silence." Samuel moved closer, his hand covering hers. "You were surviving Evelyn. There's a difference." "Perhaps," she conceded. "But now I have a chance to correct that balance, to ensure these records serve justice rather than further corruption." "At considerable personal risk," Samuel reminded her. "Blackwood won't surrender his enterprise without significant resistance." Evelyn met his gaze directly, the same determination that had first emerged during her confrontation with Thomas now fully evident. "Some risks are worth taking," she said simply. "Some principles worth defending." Samuel recognized in her words the same core belief that had guided his own life, that standing for what was right mattered more than personal safety. It was this shared understanding that had drawn them together through circumstances neither could have anticipated. "Then we'll face what comes together," he promised. The journey to Denver aboard Hollister's private rail car provided unexpected comfort after their previous travel accommodations. Attached to a regular freight movement, they bypassed passenger stations where Blackwood's men might be watching, maintaining the element of surprise that had become their primary advantage. Evelyn slept on a proper bunk, while Samuel and Caldwell reviewed their approach for presenting the evidence to the Railroad Commission. Hollister had remained behind to manage his ranch operations, but provided letters of introduction to key commission members, men with whom he had established business relationships over the years. "Blackwood will have contingencies," Caldwell warned. "Men like him always maintain alternative approaches when primary strategies fail." "Then we adapt accordingly," Samuel replied, the soldier in him responding to tactical challenges. "Our primary objective remains presenting this evidence before the formal session Monday morning." "And Henderson?" Caldwell inquired. "His testimony would strengthen the case considerably." "One challenge at a time," Samuel counseled. "First, we secure the Commission's attention with the documentation. Then we address the Colonel's situation." By Saturday evening, their train approached the outskirts of Denver. Samuel woke Evelyn gently, both of them preparing for their return to the city, where dangers almost certainly awaited. "We'll avoid standard stations," Samuel explained as they gathered their minimal belongings. Hollister arranged for his car to be diverted to a private siding used for cattle shipments. "And from there?" Evelyn asked. "Nelson should meet us according to our telegraph arrangements." Samuel checked his revolver methodically. "Then we proceed directly to secure Henderson's documentation before approaching the commission members." Caldwell, who had spent the journey maintaining his peddler disguise, adjusted his ragged coat. "I'll proceed separately, draw less attention. Rejoin you at the agreed location once I've surveyed the situation." The train slowed as it approached the private siding brakes, squealing against steel wheels. Through the windows, Samuel observed the industrial outskirts of Denver, warehouses, stockyards, and freight handling facilities operating even in the evening hours. "Ready?" he asked Evelyn. She nodded, clutching Thomas's ledger securely in a leather satchel. "Ready." They disembarked cautiously, scanning the shadowed loading area for any sign of Nelson or potential threats. The area appeared deserted, save for a few railroad workers managing the freight transfer, paid well by Hollister, to ask no questions about his car's passengers. "He should be here," Samuel muttered, concern growing as they waited in the shelter of a storage building. "Perhaps delayed by circumstances," Evelyn suggested, though her expression revealed similar worry. 20 minutes passed with no sign of Nelson. Samuel's instincts, honed through years of military experience, registered increasing alarm. Something had gone wrong. "We can't wait indefinitely," he decided. "We'll proceed to the alternate location, the Conway Hotel where we first met Nelson." They hired a freight wagon to transport them toward the commercial district, maintaining vigilant observation for any sign of surveillance. The driver, indifferent to their obvious tension, navigated the back streets with casual familiarity. Denver's evening bustle provided both cover and complication as they approached the Conway. Samuel noted nothing immediately suspicious, but the absence of Nelson remained troubling. "Wait here," he instructed Evelyn as the wagon paused a block from the hotel. "I'll reconnoiter first." "Be careful," she urged, gripping his hand briefly. Samuel approached the Conway with calculated casualness, positioning himself to observe the entrance and surrounding street without drawing attention. Nothing seemed amiss initially, typical evening patrons entering and exiting, no obvious surveillance positions. He was about to signal Evelyn forward when a hand fell lightly on his shoulder. "Captain McGraw," William Nelson's voice came softly from behind. "Don't react visibly. We have complications." Samuel maintained his relaxed posture, though every instinct tensed at the unexpected contact. "Explain." "Blackwood's men at the hotel," Nelson murmured, "watching for your return. They detained my associate this morning, extracted information about our meeting arrangements." "How did you avoid them?" "Back entrance. Staff connection." Nelson's voice remained low, urgent. "But we can't linger. They're systematically checking all arrivals." Samuel nodded toward Evelyn's position down the street. "Mrs. Carter has Thomas's records. Complete documentation of his operations for Blackwood." "Excellent," Nelson approved. "But we need to move immediately. Henderson's evidence is temporarily secure, but Blackwood's men are searching known locations." "Where can we meet safely?" "St. James Hotel," Nelson suggested. "Room 214, 1 hour. Come separately, use the service entrance on the alley." With that, Nelson moved casually away, disappearing into the evening crowd with practiced ease. Samuel returned to Evelyn, relaying the changed circumstances as their wagon continued toward less trafficked streets. "Blackwood knows we've returned," Evelyn concluded. "How?" "Unclear," Samuel admitted. "But the plan remains viable. We meet Nelson, combine the documentation approach, the commission tomorrow." They separated briefly, approaching the St. James through different routes to minimize detection risk. Samuel circled the block twice before confirming no obvious surveillance, then escorted Evelyn through the service entrance as instructed. Room 214 revealed Nelson pacing anxiously, relief evident when they arrived intact. "You weren't followed." "Not that we detected," Samuel replied, securing the door behind them. "You have Henderson's documentation." Nelson hesitated. "Not physically with me. It's secured nearby, but—" His expression revealed uncomfortable news. "Blackwood has accelerated his timeline. The commission chairman has called a special closed session for tomorrow morning. Votes already arranged." "Before the formal Monday meeting?" Evelyn asked, alarmed. "Precisely. Blackwood anticipates our intervention is moving to preempt it." Nelson's frustration was evident. "We need to present our evidence tonight directly to commissioners at their homes, if necessary." "How many commissioners need convincing?" Samuel inquired, mind shifting to tactical assessment. "3. Hold the balance. Chairman Abernathy is firmly in Blackwood's camp. Commissioners Porter and Schuyler likely controlled through financial arrangements. But Commissioners Davis-Williamson and Gregory remain independent, potentially receptive to compelling evidence." Nelson calculated aloud. "We need 2 of the 3 to block Blackwood's water rights applications. Then we approach them directly," Samuel decided. "Tonight." "Risky," Nelson warned. "Blackwood will have men watching their residences." "Then we create a diversion," Samuel countered. "Draw attention elsewhere while making our approach." A knock at the door froze all 3 in sudden tension. Samuel moved instantly, revolver ready, positioning himself strategically while gesturing Nelson and Evelyn to cover. "Who's there?" Samuel called. "Peddler with promised merchandise. came Caldwell's distinctive voice. Samuel relaxed marginally, opening the door just enough to verify the old scout's identity before admitting him. "Situation's deteriorated," Caldwell reported without preamble. "Blackwood's men throughout the city. 4 watching this hotel already, though they haven't identified this specific room yet." "How did they track us?" Evelyn wondered. "Telegraph intercepts most likely," Nelson suggested, "despite our precautions." "Blackwood's moved up the commission vote to tomorrow morning," Samuel informed Caldwell. "We need to reach key commissioners tonight." The old scout nodded, absorbing this. "Direct approach too dangerous. But I may have an alternative." He turned to Nelson. "The chairman's reception tonight at the Denver Club. All commissioners attending, yes?" Nelson's eyes widened. "Of course. The centennial reception. I'd forgotten with everything else happening." "What reception?" Samuel asked. "Annual affair honoring the commission's work," Nelson explained. "Formal gathering of territorial officials, railroad executives, prominent citizens. All commissioners will be present." "As will Blackwood," Caldwell added, "but also sufficient distinguished guests to provide necessary cover for our approach." "We can't simply walk into a formal reception," Evelyn objected. "We have no invitations, appropriate attire, or official standing." Caldwell's weathered face creased in a sly smile. "Perhaps not as ourselves, but with appropriate assistance." He withdrew several folded papers from his coat. "Invitations can be acquired, attire borrowed, identities temporarily assumed." "You're suggesting we infiltrate the reception," Samuel clarified. "I'm suggesting we utilize an opportunity," Caldwell corrected. "Commissioner Gregory served with Henderson during the war. Commissioner Williamson owns cattle interests that compete directly with Blackwood's associates. Commissioner Davis has repeatedly questioned the transparency of certain railroad arrangements. All potentially receptive to our evidence," Nelson concluded, "if we can reach them in a controlled environment where Blackwood can't prevent the interaction." Samuel considered the approach, weighing risks against dwindling alternatives. "How soon can you arrange the necessary elements?" he asked Caldwell. 2 hours, the old scout promised. "I have certain connections in Denver from previous operations." "Then we proceed," Samuel decided. "Tonight we either secure the commission's intervention or Blackwood achieves everything he's worked toward." As Caldwell departed to arrange their unorthodox entry to the reception, Samuel turned to Evelyn, whose expression revealed both determination and apprehension. "This places you at considerable risk," he acknowledged. "If you prefer to remain here with the documentation—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "I lived with Thomas's corruption. I'll see this through to its conclusion." Her chin lifted slightly. "Besides, I believe I still remember how to navigate a formal social gathering." Samuel smiled, despite the gravity of their situation. "I have no doubt." 2 hours later, transformed by borrowed finery into the very image of frontier aristocracy, they prepared for what might well be the decisive confrontation in their struggle against Blackwood's corrupt empire. Whether they succeeded or failed would be determined before dawn.